So it
Uh,
looks like we're live. Just in case we are live, welcome to today's edition of Medieval Myth Busting. I am the creative Contessa, and this is my friend and living historian colleague Philip from Irish Medieval History. And today we have a great show planned for you. We hope to disappoint lots of people, busting false ideas about the Middle Ages. Yeah.
what
So Philip, how are you doing this morning over there in Japan?
hot, sticky. I'm down in the south of Japan right now, over on Okinawa Island. There's a ton of Americans that know of Okinawa because of a lot of Marines doing their service over here and stuff. And they will easily tell you right now it is sticky and it is hot here on the island. So yeah, I'd say I'm doing quite good. How are you keeping, Rachel? How are you doing this
Oh,
morning?
we just finished like the first deadly heat wave of the summer where every day it was 100 degrees Fahrenheit or,
Uh,
38 degrees centigrade and, humidity enough to rehydrate dried vegetables. So,
Interesting.
yeah, but I was so happy when I saw that today it's only going to be like 29 degrees. I was so
Mm.
excited.
Oh, nice. Not as bad as it was last week, so I suppose.
Yeah, it's exactly. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I've been preparing for a big 2 week living history festival that I'm going to in the US. So I'll be living my best 15th century life for 2 solid weeks. And
15th
so,
century. Which style are you going for? Are you going for more later 15th century or earlier 15th
yeah,
century?
so it's going to be, 1470s to 1490s for me, pretty
Oh,
much.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And now that's just my camp. This is a multi-period medievalist event. So there'll be, Norse groups, there'll be people doing, um, we call them the 14th century mafia. There'll be there'll be people doing, Persian and Japanese and all kinds of eras too. So it's a kind of a global medievalist event, not focused on like one period or place. So every camp kind of has their own thing. My camp will be 1470s to 1490s, and it's a little, it'll be very little this year. Not many people are going to the event this year. Europeans and Canadians have all said, not going to America right now.
Oh no.
Yeah, the
But I suppose
Australians,
there's
Canadians, and Europeans, rather, sorry, not Americans, Europeans, Canadians, and Australians.
mm,
Yeah.
but I suppose that's down to the fact that there's so many anniversary events happening in Europe, is it?
Oh no, no, no. It's because people are getting deported left, right, and center.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Uh,
So no one wants to risk getting detained by ICE. I mean,
Yeah, you're
and
right actually, because there was a few Norwegians and Irish people that tried getting over, and it was the JD Vice. Anyone who had the JD Vice meme. And the thing is, what's funny is that JD Vice even thought it was strange. Like, so even the person who allegedly was made fun of even thinks it's stupid, you know?
right, yeah.
So yeah, I think some people just got a bit too power greedy or something. I don't know.
Well, the second I agree. If and here's the thing: to get the visa to come in, the visitor's visa, they're
Mm,
requiring you to provide all of your social media logins. And
yeah,
I was like, no, no, I wouldn't go either. Nope, screw
yeah,
you.
yeah.
So instead, America is losing massive amounts of tourist dollars this year.
Mm.
So yeah, it's going to be a much smaller event. It's usually 10 to 12,000 people. I'm thinking if we get 8,000, we'll be lucky.
Oh, I. Rachel, is it possible for you to stand up right now? I don't think you're kind of pinned down now, aren't you?
I mean,
Because
I
people
can,
are looking. Yeah, people want to see your dress.
yeah. And then, oh, wow. Well, now I'm going to have to do repairs on the dress. Yeah, then
Mm-hmm.
this is the skirt. Oh, wait, gosh, am I missing? I'm not. Where's my chat? Where's the chat? Oh, there it is. Where is the chat? There it is. Okay, got it. Sorry, good morning, everyone. Sorry, I didn't have the chat on, so I wonder what Philip was on about, people asking.
Questions.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Look at all that. Let's see.
Bum bum
Oh, Stacy,
bum.
you can go away. We don't need you in this. Yeah, you can go away. It's people like you
Yeah.
who are ruining our country. Um, yeah. So, yeah, so like those Germans who were actually deported from Hawaii, even though they were there legally to visit Hawaii.
Oh,
So
stop! It's wild right now.
Yeah, it's
Because the same
terrible.
thing, there was a lot of fighting over in, what was it called? Protesting and stuff with the homeless crisis and stuff in Ireland as well. And it's mostly the government exploiting pretty much everyone. And I think that's the problem, is that people are being exploited by the people at the very top as well,
Oh
uh,
yeah, for certain.
manipulated, gaslighted, and controlled. And I think we should stop fighting amongst ourselves and start, definitely questioning what's going on this week. But anyway, we could literally just waffle all day about that stuff. Jesus Christ, you're getting overexcited. I'm here trying to do the settings, and you're getting overexcited there. It's very funny. She's getting away with that kind of language. I'm surprised the bot hasn't kicked in for that one. Um,
By the way, Stacy, I'm American, so you can screw right the hell off.
yeah. Where's that one? Oh, Oh, that's weird. She's already banned on my side.
Oh, how is
Yeah.
she? How is
How
she?
she
She's
commenting is right.
scared. She's from
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She's on my side, but
yeah.
I've gone on to the comments itself because I'm actually over on my settings trying to see who comments and no comments, because I've been getting weirdos for the last 2 weeks now because my algorithm is jumping up, but I'm getting the stupidest of comments off people. I
Yeah.
had what was it, comments of people yesterday just talking about Alka's, what was it, the Irish culture. And you see, in Ireland we have a thing called the session, right, where we go in and we enjoy music and having a pint. And people think a session is where we just go in, get drunk, and fight amongst ourselves. Like, they can't tell the difference between our actual Irish culture and what we actually do like.
Right.
So I'm getting a lot of those comments, and I'm like, even to start having that kind of conversation, it's a level of stupidity, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Okay, so this morning, everyone, we are. I don't. Why is she? She should be blocked. Let me
yeah,
see if I can.
but she's not on my comment section. She's popping up on the paired side of it.
Yeah, that's paired as you though.
It's popping up on my side. How
Yeah.
do I go into what I'll do is, oh, actually, maybe. Oh, got it.
Oh, good.
Right, now I have it.
Yeah. People like
Because,
that. People
yeah,
like that are ruining the world, unfortunately.
with her comments, there was no need for what she was saying. But I seen her comments straight away, and I was like, okay. But no, I've changed the stream customization now because what was it called? It was only, what was it, 5 minutes ago we paired it properly up.
Oh, right.
So
Oh, right. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So you had to
And
go and put subscribers only or something like
that's literally what I have it right now, but I have it proper strict up now because I'm getting way, and to be honest with you guys, I hate all this kind of, because I like us to go on and be unrestricted when it comes down to talking about medieval history. Like, I like being able to talk about the effects of SA on a community,
right.
or how it is to, do such and such a thing, or talk about early medieval slavery and all that kind of stuff. I like to be unrestricted when it comes down to that kind of conversation. I hate to put restrictions on, but when you've got the likes of ourselves coming onto the chat and just having swings off people, like, the front door is there. You can just leave,
Yeah,
just press the X
seriously.
button, like, you
And
know.
and you're not an airplane. You don't have to announce your takeoff. Just go.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so Elena, I'm multi-streaming, but I'm not streaming to Twitch today. I'm streaming to Facebook and TikTok today. For
Mm-mm.
as long as I can continue streaming to TikTok, because God knows. Yeah, so it won't be on Twitch, Elena. I'm sorry, I forgot to get back to you about that. I've been so crazy busy. Well, anyway, so everyone, today we are going to be busting the medieval myth of the kilt. So yeah, this is something Philip and I encounter all the time in our living history journey, is people insisting that kilts are medieval, that the Scottish kilt is medieval. And then of course we encountered that weird AI thing about the ancient saffron Irish kilt, right?
The saffron one is interesting though, because to be honest with you, I like the debate about when did saffron come into Ireland. To be quite honest with you.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, no. I mean, that's a fun debate, but the one of I got someone tried to school me, a professional fashion historian, on the so-called Irish kilt, and he
Mm.
used Chat GPT to do it.
Oh well.
And Chat GPT's response was the saffron kilt, which has been used for thousands of years. And I'm like, oh no, sweetie, just no. So
Yeah,
many
yeah.
reasons, no.
Mm.
So yeah, today we are going to be going through exploring what was actually being worn in Scotland and in part in Ireland, why people think those were kilts, and when the kilt actually cropped up. And then when the saffron kilt, not the saffron shirt, but the saffron kilt came around. Yeah. So
Mm.
yeah. Um, so what kinds of what kinds of rumors and myths have you heard about kilts yourself?
Well, the thing about the kilt, right? So you have to remember, I was born back in. I was only born around 1989, right? So I was born at the peak of Braveheart. So when I was about 5 or 6, that's when we got the image of the kilt in the 13th century, which
Right,
was during the Scottish War of Independence.
right,
And I think that was the first time that people had seen, peak high medieval clothing and stuff. And so that's the kind of interpretation everyone got because of Braveheart, that we
right.
had princesses and we had castles, but now we have Scottish people who have tartan kilts and tartan kilts with holes in it, which is kind of strange because there's a lot of people point out William Wallace was actually a noble. He was a person of high class. So even if he had a tartan kilt, which he didn't, by the way, I just need to highlight that.
We're gonna
It
lead off with that. Just
Yeah, yeah,
right off
yeah.
the get go.
Um, it definitely wouldn't be a tartan kilt with holes in it, you know. And I remember that opening. There's an opening part of it when he's a child and he's running around, very poorly dressed for the opening parts of the movie,
And
and
he's
even him,
dirty, I think I
yeah,
recall.
yeah, yeah, very dirty, and he lives in a small little wooden shack. Not like the actual William Wallace lived in a nice little comfortable Moat Bailey castle or some form of a Moat Bailey castle.
Right.
So for him to be running around the place with a what was it called? Kilt on in a small little house. It's strange, to be quite honest with you.
Yeah, it definitely a lot many Americans especially have a completely horrible misconception about medieval Scotland, one,
Mm,
medieval Scottish fashion two, and William Wallace. They have no idea. It's really bad.
mm, mm. Um, yeah, jumping over to Wayne's thing there about myself being young. Yeah, Wayne, compared to yourself, because you were definitely what was it, in your 30s or 40s by the time we went into the 90s and stuff. And so I think that's very, very interesting about people who are in their 30s and their 40s back in the. I'm just going into my 40s now, like, and a lot of people like my parents' age and stuff who would have been around that age in the 90s. That was the perspective of what they had. Before then, it was very Tudor orientated as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. It was all, Henry VIII and Queen Elizabeth and the Robin Hood movies. And
Mm. Oh
there wasn't
yeah.
but there wasn't much that depicted medieval Scotland, right?
Mm.
There were that medieval Scotland didn't make it into cinemas. I think that I mean that's the first major movie that I can think of that's about medieval Scotland that made it into cinemas, which meant that it would have been all the more important for them to do some freaking research and get it right,
Yeah.
right?
Um, because I
um,
think I know I'm pretty much talking for Wayne there, but I'm pretty sure that's the first time Wayne would have seen a depiction of what a Gaelic man would have looked like during the high medieval period. So he pretty much got fed alive from the very start,
oh yeah.
from my perspective. Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, I had just joined a medieval recreation group in the
Mm.
U.S. at about the time that Braveheart came out as a fresh 14-year-old, and so that was majorly influential for everyone. So suddenly, all the guys wanted to wear great kilts, right?
Yeah.
And woad. Of course, they wanted to cover themselves in woad paint, And
Oh,
that,
stop.
oh, I know. So that unfortunately like ruined a whole generation of medieval recreationists who stupidly thought, well, what I see in Hollywood must be real and correct, instead of bothering to do research. But as we're going to find out today, it's actually not at all easy to do research on medieval Scottish clothing. It is super hard. And Philip, do you know why it's super hard to do research on medieval Scottish clothing? Can you guess the biggest, meanest, most prominent reason why it's so hard?
Is it English propaganda, perhaps,
Oh no,
or
it's it's
destruction of
it's
literature?
it's the Reformation.
Oh yes,
It's the
destruction of literature.
Reformation. So
But is that okay? So can I put this question out there before
yes.
you answer it? Is that because of the Tudor Reformation, or is that just because of the radical religious lunatics that were happening? Well, for people's feelings who are being hurt, you absolute animals. What are you doing to your women?
Yeah, seriously.
7,000 women. Like what?
Burnt at the stake or hanged. Yeah. No,
Uh,
the Presbyter, the Calvinist movement in Scotland was gruesome and brutal on so many levels, but in terms of historical record, they just the iconoclasm, because they purposefully stripped paint off of church walls, so all those medieval frescoes depicting people in medieval clothing gone, destroyed
mm,
statues, destroyed tomb effigies, destroyed stained glass, anything depicting people they considered to be the 16th and 17th century Calvinist movement considered to be heresy, considered to
mm,
be a sin because it was idolatry, right? And so and they burnt entire books of hours. They burnt illuminated books of prayer. They burnt illuminated Bibles. They burnt illuminated texts in mass.
mm.
And so the second you
In
have that
mass
level,
itself, Jesus.
right? No, en masse, not in mass. Sorry, en
All right.
masse. I mean, that would be interesting, but no, they weren't doing mass anymore, right? Mass is Catholic, and that's
Yeah, yeah.
Papist.
All
So,
right.
because of that level of artistic visual destruction, it is very challenging to research how clothes in Scotland looked. It's not
Mm,
impossible, but it's not as easy as France, where you can do a random Google search for illuminated manuscript and you're going to get something French and medieval, like
mm, mm,
9 times out of 10, right? So I'm not saying it's easy to do research into medieval Scottish clothing. And in fact, for those of you who are interested, there is a research project that is almost done and ready to be published by Heritage Scotland. I think it's Heritage Scotland or the National Museums of Scotland. One of those big organizations that's actually has official access to all of these resources has
mm.
funded a project to actually do in-depth research into medieval Scottish clothing. And I've reached out to the person who's in charge, and she wrote back and she said they're this close to publishing. So
Ooh.
so stay tuned, hopefully, for new information that's just going to blow our minds, right? But until then, the resources are rather limited. But even still, with the resources we have, we can put together at least some picture. And sadly, my dearest friends, that picture does not include what you all think of as a kilt, neither the great kilt nor the kilt,
Mm.
the small kilt. I forget what it's called in Gaelic. So let's I guess you can't really, but it's hard to prove a negative, right? Like
Mm.
logically, technically, you can't prove a negative. So what we're going to focus on today is what we do know and the information we do have, right? So do you know what the word kilt means without reading that definition?
The word kilt. Oh
Yeah,
God, is it a form of blanket?
I know that's actually plaid.
Okay, plaid.
Plaid is a form of blanket. Yeah.
Now I'm even more confused to plaid because I thought plaid was connected to tartan.
Yes. We'll get to that. It is, but not the way. Yes.
Go
But
on.
we'll get to that too. I'll discuss that. We'll get to when we get to the tartan section of the
Okay.
presentation. Yeah.
Okay,
No.
we're
No.
still
No.
we're still playing the game. Okay,
Yeah. Still
kilt.
playing the game.
So is it connected to? Can I use cloak? Is it around those words?
It is.
Kilt.
It is. It is not. It is actually a
Okay.
verb originally.
Okay.
So this is why, like, to really to study history in depth, everyone, this is why a multidisciplinary approach is so important. So
Yeah.
whenever I'm doing research into any historical topic, if it has a modern word that we use, I always go and look up the etymology of that word to figure out what's
Mm,
going on. And that usually reveals a lot. So the word kilt is actually a medieval English word. It's a Middle English word, not a Scottish word at all, even the least littlest bit. Not
mm,
Gaelic, not even Scots. It comes into Scots eventually via English, but it's English in its origin. And
mm.
actually, they think it might trace back to Norwegian. So
Okay,
um,
that makes sense.
to kilt something means to tuck it up. And I do this all the time with my skirts. I kilt them up over a belt so that they don't drag on the ground.
Mm,
That's what kilting means. It means to tuck something up, right? To truss it, to tuck it up.
mm.
That is what kilting means.
Okay, so to take a step back from my perspective, because from my understanding of, maybe I'm ruining some later of the presentation, but from my understanding, the kilt starts off as a cloak, and so you've got various techniques of how to put the cloak on, depending on your situation. So my understanding now is that you
Yes.
have the cloak, then the cloak becomes a bigger, a blanket. From your definition, because
Yeah.
it's getting colder. From my understanding, it's because they're
Right.
getting more into a survival, longer campaigns,
Right.
longer wars, so they have bigger blankets. And so instead of just wrapping it around the shoulder, they're now kilting it around the hips. Is that what's going on?
Yes, that's exactly what
Okay.
happened. So at the end of the 16th century, the
Yeah.
very end of the 16th century, when we're reaching kind of peak Little Ice Age, right? So, like you said, it's getting colder, and suddenly we've got these longer campaigns. It's no longer a question of, well, we're only fighting in the nice months. We're now fighting at other times of year too, right?
Mm,
And so now you've got this big cloak thing, and actually it's referred to. So the earliest reference, and unfortunately I didn't include this in, is the earliest reference I could find to not a kilt. The earliest reference to the word kilt as a skirt is 1730, quelt,
1730.
Quelt. That's the
Mm,
earliest reference that it's ever used as a noun, as a garment in and of itself. So before that, what you have references to in English, that they refer to the Scots and the Irish, by the way, as wearing these cloaks, these mantles. And
mm.
at the end of the 16th century, in 1594, there's a reference by Hugh. I've got it here on my phone because I didn't manage to get it included in the presentation. Mea maxima culpa. That's on me, but I do have it here, and I'll read it to you. So this is the earliest reference that I have. And so, 1594, a group of Highlanders from the Western Isles went to Ireland to fight under Red Hugh O'Donnell. You probably
Oh, that's
heard
the Nine
that.
Years'
Yeah.
War. Yeah.
Yeah. Writing about them, oh God, I'm going to brutally. This is a name with lots of G's and H's and D's and H's. Uh, I'm not even a person whose name I cannot possibly pronounce correctly. Lugach, Lugeth, Lugeth,
Oh, is that the McLaughlin's?
Lughaidh.
Oh, I'm
Um,
terrible at getting
right,
off.
yeah,
One of the lads in the comment section will come in now because you can see the lads coming in there.
right, yeah.
Uh, uh,
So this gentleman, he noted that despite being dressed similarly, the Scots could be distinguished from the Irish soldiers as follows, quote, "They were recognized among the Irish soldiers by the distinction of their arms and clothing, for, and this is how, their exterior dress was mottled cloaks
hmm,
of many colors. Their belts were worn over their loins outside their cloaks." So mottled color means a lot different colors,
hmm,
right? Fabric of different colors. And it's a cloak, and they've got a belt on the outside around their loins. So like a little bit below the waist kind of thing.
hmm.
And so they've belted their cloaks, exactly like you say. They have belted their cloaks so that it's easier to move around and probably also keeps it warmer.
Mm,
So because and then some people say, well, why don't they just wear a more tailored overgarment or whatever? But it makes sense because the this cloak, which is called a plaid in Scots, not Gaelic, by the
Okay.
way. Or the brat in Ireland, they both serve very similar functions, and the function was multi-purpose, right? It's like the
Mm.
Swiss Army knife of the fashion world, because you can use it as a cloak to keep you warm. You can use it as a tent if you need
Yeah.
be. It's got all these different. You can lay it on the ground if you need something to be on the ground for whatever reason, right? It's got all these different purposes as a rain gear,
Yeah.
right? Because it's usually boiled so that it actually has a really tight weave, and then it keeps the water out, right? So it's a multi-purpose garment, and the second you add tailoring in, it becomes a one-purpose garment.
Mm.
So it completely makes sense.
Okay, so in my interpretation, right, when does the mini ice age start? Because that could give us an indication of how early they were
Right.
using larger um, cloaks, and on top of that as well, when they started doing this kind of kilt technique of belting up around their hips and stuff.
Well, so the
What,
so the mini ice age, the younger Dryas starts in the 15th century, but it doesn't get like,
okay.
it's getting colder, but it's still not cold yet. But
Mm,
by the end of the 16th century, the Thames is freezing. The Thames in London is freezing so solidly that they're able to transport goods on sledges on
mm,
the Thames River, right? So it's not it's the like, it's starting to get peak cold at the end of the 16th century is when that's really
mm,
starting to happen. So because the Middle Ages was actually, this for many centuries was very warm, and they were getting 2 or 3 harvests a year across Europe, including
mm.
England, by the way, because it was warm enough to manage that. And then the Black Death comes, and at about the time of the Black Death, the climate starts changing, but it's
Okay.
gradual. It's not like we go from one day it's 30 degrees centigrade and the next day it's 10 degrees centigrade. It takes years for this to catch up. And it really seems that if you look at the fashion records, I mean, if you look at the kinds of climatological records that we have in terms of like people talking about, well, things are freezing now,
Mm.
it's really the end of the 16th century when it's starting to get real cold, really, really cold.
Okay. But
So
there's still a possibility that cloaks are getting bigger in the 15th century.
I mean, they're getting bigger, but it's like you haven't reached peak big yet, shall
Okay.
we say? Because and actually, there's in that for that, I would like to actually share some um, descriptions um, of the word of it was the word plaid. Actually, I thought I had the word plaid here, because it's the word plaid is what appears in Scots sources for a blanket, because plaid is a blanket at first. It is not a
Mm.
pattern.
Yeah.
And this actually ties back to the word tartan.
Mm.
So tartan is also not a Scottish word. It's not a Scots word. It's not a Gaelic word. It's not even an English word. It's a French word. It's an old French word.
Mm.
And it comes from the word tertain, Tertain, many different spellings. And basically tertain in the 13th century, and this once I say this is going to click for you, it was a compound fabric. So by that means it was two different fibers.
Mm.
It was wool and it was linen. And because you have two different kinds of fibers, you automatically, no matter what, are going to have two different colors, right? The
Mm. Mm.
second you have two different fibers, because even if they're both dyed brown, just say brown, the brown that the linen dyes, for instance, is going to be different than the brown that the wool dyes. So you're going to have two shades
Okay.
at the very least. And the tartan in the sources in 13th century France and England, when you see the word tartan, it's always a pragmatic, practical fabric. Cloaks, heavily used for cloaks, heavily used for outer garments meant to keep you warm, used for blankets, literally for bed coverings, for situations where you need something that's not going to be against your skin. So it doesn't have to be super silky and fine. It needs to be hard wearing, and it needs to be practical. And that's where we see tartan being used. And
Mm.
you can easily see how you can go linguistically from tartan to tartan. Like that's not even a
Oh, yeah,
stretch.
yeah, yeah.
A
Mm.
word that is spelled T variously, by the way, in the 13th and 14th century. Also, one of its spellings is Tartane in the earlier sources. And then we get to the Scots expense accounts for the Royal House of Scotland in the 15th century. And there you see the word tartan appear, but again, as clothing, not as anything that could be interpreted as a quilt, but often as outerwear. right? So you've got either
Mm,
the cloak or the blankets are also, there's lots of orders for tartan, for tartan blankets, right? But they're not, nothing having to do with skirts, nothing having to, or, short skirts that are pleated into a waistband and worn down to your knee, right? For the most part,
mm,
in the 15th century and 16th century Scottish expense accounts, tartan, and then by then it's being spelled Tartane. So that's where the word tartan comes from, and it actually, some of them, they're not all, tartan is has nothing to do with the color, it's the weave. It's two different kinds
mm,
of fibers. And then eventually that word gets associated with woolen fabrics, mottled woolen fabrics, mottled meaning multiple colors. So it's
mm.
not, in its origins, that is not, tartan has nothing to do with the pattern. Neither does plaid have anything to do with the pattern. Plaid means blanket originally in Scots English. And tartan is this compound fabric that had originally in its origin wool and linen. So
Mm.
yeah. So that's why it's important to understand the origin of words to really get to the history of what's happening and possibly how things evolved.
Yeah, because to be honest with you, this is more of the conversation I'd rather have rather than the fantasy interpretation that we have today. I have no problems with people wearing 19th century fashion, but then when you're making the claim that it's actually 13th century fashion, then we need to have a conversation and see what the actual development of that
Right.
is. And so, just to speed up the actually not speed up, actually just to go back and confirm stuff with yourself, and just to confirm for people who are listening at home. First and foremost, okay, let's take a step back to the Scottish War of Independence, Braveheart, and our interpretation of the 13th century. Is there any kilts in the period of
No.
Braveheart? Just to take a step
No,
back.
and
Okay, so
yeah,
clearly there is
nothing. So
nothing.
this is why I think it's a good step for us to go look at the art. So this was a joke,
Okay.
right? Why is a kilt called a kilt? Because that's what you're going to be if you call it, if you call it a bloody skirt, right?
Yeah.
um, but so let's go and start looking at some art, and let's get, because Ireland is also associated with the kilt, and because ChatGPT is telling people that the Irish have been wearing kilts for thousands of years. We'll address that topic too. um, so first off, let's go back to the Book of Kells. And
Mm,
let's look at some of these fashions. So it can be really helpful to understand what you're looking at. It's very easy to look at, especially medieval and earlier art, and not really be able to see what's there, because it can just look like a bunch of lines, right? A bunch of swirly lines. And where what are these layers? What are we actually seeing here, right? So you've got these garments, and we have from the first millennium. We've got, even in Scotland, we've got statuary. We've got in Ireland, you've got the Book of Kells, which is splendid and a wonderful resource,
mm.
and probably the most illuminated Irish manuscript there is, actually. So let's look at these Lewis chessmen here. Okay. So Lewis, what do you know about these chessmen, Philip?
Oh, I have to do a lot of study into this recently because I had to go into for my own private classes that I do on a Sunday over on Patreon. We've started covering the High Middle Ages, and so because there is a trade network going from Norway into Dublin, you can find bits that are very similar to the Lewis chess pieces. The Lewis chess piece is absolutely
Right.
magnificent because it was found in the Isles between Norway and Scotland and Ireland, and it's a full set. I'm pretty sure it's
It
a
is
full
a full
set, isn't
set.
it?
It's amazing.
Compared
The
to,
set is
yeah,
gorgeous.
compared to in Norway and Ireland. In Norway and Ireland, we can find bits of the set, which is so similar. It's
Right.
crazy. So it gives us a very like, and this is why I've fallen in love with it. I assume you've fallen in love with it, and many people have fallen in love with it because it shows us what the Irish, the Norwegians, and the Scottish perhaps were wearing it going into the High Middle Ages at the very start of the period of Crusaders, the reform of the church, and when you've got this change going on between the early medieval period of war bands kicking about into when period the eras are starting to centralize more. You've got this kind of people are starting to refer to it as this kind of high middle ages kind of renaissance going on with the princesses and the Moat and Bailey castles, so on and so forth. And that's why we love the Lewis chess pieces, because it shows us what clothing
Right.
was like at the very start at the 11th century, if I'm not
Yeah,
wrong.
I think they're like end of the 11th century, early 12th century. The Lewis chess pieces are right there.
Mm,
Like you say, they're in that transitional period. So I mean, you look at
yeah.
these beautiful. Look at this. This is the king and the queen, right? And they're both wearing cloaks. So those
Mm,
are what in Scots later on would be called a plaid. um, right. So you look at these cloaks, or could possibly be called a plaid. The king is wearing a cloak off to on one shoulder, right? So one side is covered and then it's pinned over his shoulder. And this means that his right arm, his sword arm, by the way, is completely free.
ah, mm,
And that makes sense. You know, everyone thinks about wearing a cloak, like modern people, if they go to a Renaissance fair or whatever, they always wear the cloak, closed center, right? And if you think about it, that's great if you don't need to use your arms for anything. But if you need to
mm,
use your arms for something, you ideally want to have your dominant arm free. And so that's why if you look in a lot of the Middle Ages, especially if it's knights wearing cloaks, they've always got it, almost always it's off one shoulder and it's the right arm that's free,
mm,
right? So you see the cloak on our king, and then you see this amazing tunic. I mean, look at this gorgeous tunic that just goes down to the ground, and look at the beautiful
mm,
trim that's along the bottom there. Like there's so much detail in this tiny little chess piece. It's amazing. And then beneath, if you look, there's two layers of tunics, right? What you actually are seeing here are three layers. You see his cloak, well, and
mm.
I guess his sword is a fourth layer if you consider that a fashion item. Um, then he's got the cloak, he's got an over tunic, and then if you look towards the bottom, towards his feet, you see the pleats. Pleats, and I know this is going to trigger some people. You see pleats of his under tunic, and
Mm,
those pleats are not that's not a kilt. That's just his under tunic, which is very full, and his over tunic, which is not as full. And so the tighter overgarment has caused the bigger undergarment to fold in on itself. And those pleats just naturally form. They just naturally form.
okay.
It's not obviously when you're carving in ivory, you can only make fabric look so flowy. So it's going to be a little more
Yeah.
knife sharp than maybe it would be in real life because
To be honest with you, I still think it's magnificent
oh yeah, no, I
craftsmanship,
mean,
to
no,
be honest with
absolutely.
you.
No,
Yeah.
especially because, this is not like on the screen, it looks like bigger. This is bigger than real life, right? On your screen, most
Mm,
likely. So I mean the carving is amazing, but there's only so much you can do when you're carving small to make it look as
mm.
realistic as possible. It's still, I mean, yeah, no, these are masterpieces of carving. 1,000,000%. No argument
Yeah.
for me. I always get fascinated by their stunned expressions though. It's so this is most likely, as you say, we don't know for certain if this is Scottish, as we would call modernly, Scottish, Irish,
Mm,
Norwegian, because it's from the Isle of Lewis, which is one of these intersectional spaces.
yeah. Well, if we look at the cross of Caen, which is meant to have the piece of the cross that which came back from the Crusades and stuff, because the Irish and the Norwegians at this point are going off to Jerusalem to crusade to fight the Saracens, so on
Right,
and so forth. I think what's going on is that we have the culture which a lot of academics refer to as Hiberno-Scandinavian. So where we kind of look at this as kind of a nationalist perspective of Irish people dress Irish and Norwegians dress Norwegians. In my interpretation, it seems to me, going off of the work of the likes of Claire Downham and stuff, that it is very much a mixed culture in the middle. This Hiberno-Scandinavian, as they
Right.
referred to, where it's a mixture of both the Gaelic world, a little bit of an Anglo-Saxon influence in there, and also heavily the Norwegian world mixing up in the middle of all that. So that's my interpretation of the fashion that's going on in both Norway and Ireland at the
Right. Yeah, it's
time.
I think people like to imagine now, especially in the wake of nationalism, 19th century nationalism, by the
Mm,
way, guys. We like to imagine that in before us, everyone had a traditional folk costume that distinguished them from everyone else. But the reality of fashion is not that. The reality of fashion for most of the Middle Ages is that in a general geographic region, the fashions were very, very, very similar from region to region. There might be some local differences based on resources and materials available, but that the general silhouette was the same. If your weather conditions are the
mm.
same, it's just there isn't that kind of national costume as such. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I agree that probably these chessmen, probably my feeling is they represent the reality in all of those places.
That's how I
Yeah,
feel as well, especially looking at the Cross of Con, which has so many Norwegian influences on it, and also it's meant to be in the center. You can actually open up the middle of the Cross of Con, and it's meant to have the true cross. Now, the true cross over time has withered away; it no longer exists. Because it was made of wood, like so that's completely gone. However, we still know it had a piece of Cross of Con, which shows crusaders going over to Jerusalem, returning back, but also on top of that, the influences they brought onto the island of Ireland from the
right,
wider world, and also the whole fact it's in the Hiberno-Scandinavian style, which shows most likely the likes of Rory O'Connor, who was known as Rex Hiberno, King of Ireland, would have dressed similar to this, in my
right. Yeah,
interpretation.
absolutely, 100%. I just don't see,
Mm,
you're the places where the differences are going to happen are in the details. For instance, our Irish friends who might be wandering around without shoes if they're out in a bog, right?
yeah, it's true. Like I take off my shoes too when I go
Right,
into a
for
bog.
instance. But that's not a fashion, that's a form. That's a function, or not a form thing.
Mm,
That's a function thing, right? But when they do wear shoes, those shoes will basically be the same as the shoes worn in Scotland
mm.
or Norway, for instance.
But what's very interesting is Harold Barelegs, when he comes from, he's king of Norway in around 1103. And when he comes to Ireland, he's known as Barelegs because he takes his shoes off when he comes to Ireland to campaign in Ireland, for obvious reasons, because Ireland is very,
Right.
very boggy, which massively indicates that Norwegians had shoes on when they were campaigning in Norway. And the moment they arrive in Ireland, it's like, oh, this is way too boggy. Take the shoes
Right,
off,
right,
lads.
exactly.
Mm,
Yeah, and also because if any of you have ever tried walking in medieval shoes in boggy conditions, the mud will suck your shoes right off and they will disappear into the
mm.
ground. Ask me how I know.
Oh God, there's a
me,
horror
me
story
with a
behind this.
shovel trying to dig a 3 foot deep hole to get my mud sucked down shoes out of the ground.
Jesus.
That was one event where it just rained. It literally rained for like a week, and it
Oh,
was the ground had
oh,
just given up on
stop.
being solid. So yeah,
Oh,
that
stop. It sounds
at
like a
that
horror
event
show.
we were, in fact, everyone had given up on shoes and stockings. We were all just wandering around barefoot, just like Ireland. It was a
Mm,
real
mm, mm.
Irish moment. What can I say?
Oh, stop. Then, it's when you're at an event and you start hearing the rain. It's what, 3 or 4 in the morning, and you just start hearing the rain crumbling in, and you pray to God. Hopefully, this is gone in 20 minutes. It's 2 hours later, and the rain is heavier, and
Oh
you're just
God,
like, oh no. And you've left everything
yeah.
out, and you're just like, why is this happening?
I was at one event, medieval camping event, and there was literally a river
Mm.
running under my bed through my tent. Just like it was
Oh
it was a
no.
full on would carry you away river of water. And then there was another one where it was also flowing under my pavilion, but because my ground cloth was such heavy cotton canvas, it was like a waterbed.
Mm,
You would walk you walk across the floor of my pavilion and the floor would do this because the water wouldn't actually come up through the canvas. But it was, yeah. So I've been to those horror shows. I understand why Irish people would want to take their, or anyone, the Norwegians, you go to Ireland, it's boggy. You just don't even bother fighting it. You just give in.
Mm, mm.
Um,
Um, yeah, I haven't been on a nightmare like this since I was in the military. When I was in my sleeping bag and I woke up in water drowning, like So I've never been that bad at a living history event, not yet, and hopefully to God I
yeah,
don't.
we'll see. I've got 2 weeks coming up of potentially inclement American weather, so we'll find out. Stay tuned. Stay
Lovely.
tuned for the live streams of Armageddon Pensick
Oh, you're live
2025.
streaming those too?
Yeah. Uh, yeah.
Oh God.
So let's look at some other visual references from Scotland, and possibly also from Ireland. Remember, this time it's a little, at this time it can be a little harder to distinguish. So this is another this fantastic piece of sculpture dates to like the 6th century, and
Mm,
or maybe in the 5th century. So it's pretty early, but it shows warriors. At least we assume they're warriors. You know, they've got weapons and shields. So usually, and they've got dogs there, or they're hunting or something like that, right? So this is one of these pieces of statuary that people often use to say, look, they wore kilts. Those are kilts.
mm.
Okay, but let's look a little more closely, everyone. Okay, so Philip, looking more closely at this, what do you see they are wearing?
Well, from my perspective, what I'm looking at is a lot of, first and foremost, I would definitely say that their under clothing is definitely an under
Hmm.
tunic. I'm not sure if I see any pants, and I'm not sure if I see any over tunic. So I'm just assuming, this is me, and you're ready to correct me, is that they have no pants on, no shoes on. They have a linen under tunic, and then they have a cloak over that, in my
Right.
assumption.
Possibly.
Mm,
You know, could it linen, if this is the layer against your skin, then linen is what you want. You don't want wool against your
mm,
skin. You just even I mean, there are some very nice wools actually, but in this century, you probably don't want the wool against your skin. Yeah. So how do you,
mm.
that cloak that you're talking about? How do you see, in what manner is it worn? What are you seeing there in terms of the style and the way in which it is worn?
It seems to me, especially going off with the lads with the horns in their mouth, that it seems to be pinched around the shoulder. And then, like your man on the horse there on the top
Mhm.
center, he seems to have it completely around his
Right.
shoulders. And then the lads with the horns appear to have it, pinned. This is me taking a guess, and I'm probably completely wrong. There must be something pinning it in place unless they've got it wrapped around their arm on the right shoulder. So it seems to be very, very much pinned around the shoulders. And I'm assuming this is around the ninth
Right.
century. And I do know around this is either ninth century or this is definitely around the 6th century.
Yeah,
I'm assuming
I think
somewhere
it's sixth
around there.
century if I recall correctly. Yeah.
Okay. Um, and then on top of that as well, so in that period, I am aware that there is forms of brooches and
Yeah.
pins to pin it on the shoulders from
Yeah.
archaeological evidence. So I'm assuming a lot of these people have brooches and pins on their shoulders, and that's the way that they're wearing their cloaks
Yeah,
around
for
them.
certain. You're absolutely right. And I wish I'd thought to include a picture of some of those amazing brooches, because first millennium
Mm,
jewelry, the art of first millennium goldsmithing is just amazing, right? Whether it's in
mm.
Ireland, or there isn't so many finds from Scotland or Germany, it's the things these people are producing. The so-called barbarian art is amazing. Um,
Yeah, it's amazing for the
so
period.
what I see is, yeah, I agree with you. It's wrapped around their shoulders, but it's actually crossed in front. So if you
Okay.
look, you can actually see the stripes going in two different directions like this. And so you
Mm,
can actually see that the front, it crosses in the front, especially the top rider. And you can see the two
mm,
tails of the cloak that's crossed sticking out on either side over his leg there, right? And so a lot of
mm.
people look at this and they see a kilt. What I see is
Okay.
a cloak that's crossed in the front, and the pleating is just stylized folds, from the fabric
Mm,
being wider than that, and then folded up to be able to fit just over just this part of their body, again, so that they're not completely bound up in fabric to go hunting or whatever it is they're doing. I'm pretty certain they must be hunting. Those have to be hunting hounds. Yeah,
yeah, the
yeah,
hounds in the very front seem to give away the
yeah.
fact that they are hunting, especially with the
Yeah, and there's
horns.
a deer
Yeah.
there. So it's, as I see, it's two hounds actually attacking a deer, right?
Oh,
Yep.
yeah, see, I see the
Yeah.
bite
So
marks.
I'm pretty certain they're hunting. And so for
Mm,
that, you want to have also you want to be able to manage your horse. So you therefore want to be able to use your arms, but also you want to stay warm. So that's why that's
mm, mm,
visually what I see is a cloak, a length of wool, probably, like you said, and maybe
mm,
even in this era, perhaps tartan, as we now understand it, being a linen wool blend, maybe wrapped around, around their back, over their shoulders, and crossed, and no doubt pinned somewhere. I mean, I can't. It's
mm,
just very practical to pin it at least to the, their under tunic, perhaps. Yeah. So
mm,
this is the kind of art that often gets misinterpreted as being evidence of early kilts, because people, it's like you said, it can be hard to look at this very stylized carving and understand what's happening.
mm.
Let me see. To me, it looks like they're wearing a tunic and a leine, says Takeda. Yeah, so no, this is Scottish. But that kind of underscores, as we've been talking about, the very tight cultural connections that part of the world, especially in the first millennium, when Scandinavia has kind of gone out and connected everyone together anyway,
Mm.
right? So yeah,
Just 1 second there. Because the translation of Lena in just to make sure of this.
yeah. So leine,
Oh no, it's not. So there is no. Yeah, so Lena is tunic. It's meant to be popping up. I just wanted to confirm because I think Wikipedia, that could be why people are not translating it correctly. I just went into Google there to make sure Lena and tunic were the same thing. Technically speaking, in Old Irish at least, Lena and tunic are the
they are.
same word. Just to clarify, so in this period, you're completely right. They are. I should actually say Lena instead of tunic, but Lena and tunic are the same thing in the 6th and 9th century, just
Yep.
to be clear and to verify that.
Yep.
I just wanted to confirm that in Google, and it's not popping up in Google in the translate, so it's not translating that. So perhaps maybe it's just an old Irish and Middle Irish
Yes.
word, and maybe it's not in the
So
modern
yeah,
Irish.
I when I was doing my medieval Irishmen's research. So in the Old Irish dictionary, this lena as a
Mm,
word for tunic, as a synonym, as a word that only means tunic and nothing else, dates back to like the 5th century. So it's
mm,
very Old Irish, and they're pretty certain it comes from the Latin word for linen. Yeah, so
okay, that
that's
makes
the
perfect
origins,
sense.
and it makes sense then that that's the layer of tunic that's against your skin, because that would be
Mm,
linen. That would have been linen. Even then, that would have been linen in the Roman, with the Roman influence. So that seems to be the etymology of that word, which is why the lena is not a specific garment. It changes across the centuries. The thing that always seems to bind it, though, is that it's made of linen. That seems to be
mm,
supposedly, except that I say that, and then there are these epics that I think they're actually not written until the 12th or 13th century, but they refer to earlier, historical events where, there's a woman recorded as wearing a lena of green silk. So
mm, mm.
supposedly it's supposed to be the common binding thing should be that it's made of linen, and yet then you have those exceptions. So
And I needed to clarify that early on right now because later on in the 19th century, the word lena gets muddled up with the word
right.
kilt. So it's that's very, very, very important that we have to understand in the early medieval period, the word lena and under tunic are,
The
they're the
same word.
same
Yep.
word,
And in
Yeah.
fact, in the 15th century, Henry VII, in his expense or his inventories, he records having an Irish smock. Smock is the
Mm,
15th century English word for the linen shirt against your skin, right? So
okay.
so even there in the 15th century, the lena is still associated as being linen and the layer that's against your skin. So now we
Mm,
don't know anything else about it because unfortunately the description in his inventory doesn't talk about colors. It doesn't talk about embroidery or anything. Just an Irish smock. Yeah.
mm, mm.
So yeah, no. Then thank you for bringing that up, Philip, because again, this brings us back to my point
Yeah.
about language being really indicative of and important to really understand the etymology.
Yeah.
What was that a question
Yeah.
somewhere? Did I miss a question?
It's just we were talking about tunics and lenas, people wearing and what they were wearing and stuff,
Right.
and I just wanted to clarify that early in the chat
Yeah.
before we get up to the 19th century, because it's the 19th century that language changes and alters,
Right.
and that's where it gets all mixed up and muddled. And this turns into like people get very aggressive about this,
Yeah.
and
I
I
know.
don't. I think we can avoid a lot of aggressive comments if we just make the conversation clear from the start.
Yeah. Agreed. 100%. Having been the
Mm,
victim of some of those aggressive comments, I'm all in favor of that, or the target of them
mm,
anyway. So Takeda
yeah,
says the pleating just reminded me of the gathering you see on the big leinas. However, those seem to have tight sleeves. Most leina I've seen in the sleeves have baggy, loose, or baggy and loose, and drapes with folds. Yeah. So again, so Takeda, of course, there's probably a delay on the comments. So good. Thank you for making that comment, Takeda, because that plays in really well with what Philip was just saying. Leina, again, is not a specific kind of shape of garment. It's just the layer that goes against your skin before the 19th century when it completely becomes something else entirely. So yeah, the Lena,
yeah, the kilts.
yeah, right. The Lena that you've probably seen, Takeda, are 16th century. Like nearly always, it's going to be someone's doing a 16th century style Lena. Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. Right. So here's another piece of early art, early Scottish art, early Scots art, and again, you can see how people could look at this and say, "Oh yes, those are kilts." Like and like literally, like not even the great kilt, like the skirt style kilt, and I could, I think that's a case of that's a case of eisegesis. That's a case of looking at something with a preconceived notion and seeing what your brain is already programmed to see rather than seeing what is actually there. So if you actually look closely at these figures and you look above their waist, you're going to see that there's a tunic and that they're wearing a belt and that the so-called pleats, the folds that are actually there from the waist down, is just the natural consequence of having a tunic that's A-line, where the skirts of the tunic flare out from the waist, and then when they hang straight, they just naturally fold into these folds. By the way, the word pleat actually originally meant fold, not like a knife pleat. So it can, you can have natural pleats and you can have, sewn in pleats or ironed in pleats. But pleat originally just meant fold. That's all it meant. So what you're actually seeing there are men with tunics that have full skirts. And unfortunately, I think I forgot to include the Boxton man tunic to demonstrate this, because that's a great way to illustrate the fold effect. So there's a Danish, some poor Dane back in the 14th century fell in a bog, as
Oh,
as
thank God.
as people did. And he was wearing all of his clothes. So he was not sacrificed. 14th century, there's no human sacrifice anymore. He fell in the bog and he died, and he was perfectly preserved, and his clothes were perfectly, well, he was somewhat preserved. His clothing was perfectly preserved. And his tunic is designed in such a way that it has relatively full skirts, only goes to the knee, but relatively full skirts by additions of these large triangles. And then when you actually, I've made several reproductions of this following it exactly, it just naturally makes this really, really what I think is a really dapper looking, full skirts. And that's a
Mm,
man's tunic. And so what you're seeing here is that's what they're depicting here. It's not that these are bare-chested men wandering around in skirts. They're not. They're wearing tunics. Um,
mm.
but what do you see when you look at this, Philip?
It looks like a bunch of lads who are preparing to go off into battle. It's quite interesting as well because the horseman, is not wearing any stirrup as well. He's going bareback onto the horse,
Right.
which is quite interesting from a military perspective, especially for cattle raiding and stuff. So perhaps they're not even going off the battle. Maybe they're going off to rob cattle. Clothing wise, it from the image of the PowerPoint, it's quite difficult to
Yeah.
zoom in, but they do seem to just have under tunics on. I can't see any cloaks
Yeah.
on
No
this
cloaks.
time, which I find very
Yeah.
interesting. So they just seem to have, from my perspective, just the lenas on, to be quite honest
Right.
with you. And it's quite interesting because, as you were pointed out earlier, these leines have what looks like kilts, as in the way it's styled.
Right. Right. But and yet by the definition of kilting, it's not, because there's no
Mm.
fold, right? They haven't been pulled up over their belt.
Oh, yeah.
They've just been belted. Right. So it's,
Mm,
yeah, right. But by the modern misunderstanding of that term, yeah, you're right. It does look like that, but it's, if you look really, really closely, which you can't, sorry.
mhm,
You get a really high definition, version of this, or if you can scroll in on your screen, depending on what kind of screen you have. Oh, what
mm.
is the name of this stone? Darn it. I wrote it down. Not here. I am so sorry. I forgot to include the name of that rock there. I will see about doing a community post, and I'll include some of these images, and I'll include the name of them, everyone. So stay tuned for that, and I'll try to share them with Philip too.
Mm,
So
mm.
sorry, Kelly. I apologize. Yeah, you're right. And the thing about no cloaks, that's really interesting, right? Because everyone assumes, well, you just always wear a mantle, right? If you're Scots, if you're Irish, you must always wear a mantle. You can't possibly ever not wear a mantle, but that's not true.
Mm.
if if the situation doesn't call for it, you don't wear it. It's that simple.
Mm. Well, Gerald of Wales is quite interesting because in the Book of Kells and also in a few other depictions by the Irish, they always kind of depict themselves, the Kerns, who are the cattle raiders in Ireland. In the mythology, they're referred to as the Fenian. In Irish depictions, they're always seen with the cloak on and then their quarter-length pants. However, in Gerald of Wales's depiction of the cattle raiders, who are the wolf men, as he calls them, they're seen with no cloak on. They're just naked, screaming in a forest with just a quarter length pants on, which is quite
Right.
interesting because the image that you've put up there, if you look at the
Oh,
top left,
sorry.
everyone, that's actually a kern.
I
Sorry.
changed it to go to Gerald of Wales, and it took forever to change. That bottom
Oh, yeah.
bottom left corner there is from Gerald of Wales. That's his.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, yeah. The top left one is from the
Right.
Book of Kells, and that depicts a cattle raider. And you can see here he allegedly has a cloak on. Now, different people give me different answers, but the best one I can still see is a
Yeah.
cloak because it especially doesn't cover his hands. So it's a very, very good indication that, and you can see a bit of his back as well if you look really close. So it definitely indicates that it's a cloak that just goes around his shoulder, and it's only covering his what was it, his right side,
Right.
which is interesting in itself. But regardless, he's got a buckler, and we have loads of buckler finds. This is just on the peak of the Golden Age of Ireland going into the Viking Age. And so the Book of Kells comes out, and it gives us a very good indication of what cattle raiders, professional cattle raiders, look like in Ireland. So he's got his buckler and his spear, and he's ready to run out and capture some cattle from a rival to it in Ireland. So yeah, it's quite interesting how you have two different depictions. One with the cloak, which a lot of people would say it gets larger as we get into the 15th century. So it's definitely something to monitor. Is definitely the how big the cloaks are, because this cloak in this one, it's
It's
so
tiny. Yeah.
tiny compared to the 15th century.
I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
mean, so
Even
the weather is not the weather patterns are cyclical, right? So there's a warm
yeah.
period in the Middle Ages, and there's a colder period, and then there's a warm period again. So I could absolutely see that, because the Book of Kells is like 6th century, right? Like it's
Mm,
it's pretty early. So that's the I that could well have been in a warm period in Ireland. I'm actually not as familiar with the Irish weather patterns, but that could have been in a warmer period. And by the time the Lewis chessmen come along, it's getting colder again, but then it's getting warmer
yep.
again for the couple of middle centuries where they're getting 2 to 3 harvests, and then come the 16th century, it's once more getting real cold again.
Mm.
Well,
Can we
yeah, so
argue
yeah,
and debate
the
about the?
Wayne makes a good point, and those are picks on that stone, and they didn't have stirrups, but no one had stirrups at this point, guys. Actually,
Mm,
on that Pictish stone, no one in Europe had stirrups. They weren't even invented yet. Yeah, so
mm,
Romans didn't have stirrups. No one had stirrups. Stirrups actually don't get invented until the 7th century, and they don't make their way into Europe until like after that. So
mm.
so yeah, no, the Picts definitely didn't have. They didn't. No one had stirrups, not just the Picts.
Um, can we talk about, just because it pops up again and again, and as I said earlier, in the early medieval period, we have the tunic, which is the leine and stuff. we see here, if we go back over to Gerald of Wales again and his depiction of Diarmaid MacMora
Mhm.
on the bottom left, and then you have Fitzgerald on the right side. They both have the leine on. A lot of people argue this is the original leine, and that actually, and this is going to annoy you, saffron, that they have saffron
Wait,
on
you want
their
me to go back
leines.
to the Gerald of Wales page? Okay, hold on a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
okay, no,
if you
no
don't
problem.
mind. But this is the one that a lot of people, I don't know if they've started arguments with you, but they've started arguments about with myself. And you've had a counter argument for this one
I
for
have.
quite some time. So this is the 12th century,
Right.
and a lot of people are saying this is a saffron leine, and it's the original kilt. What's your interpretation on that
They
one?
didn't have saffron in Ireland in the 12th century. So,
Mm,
saffron, everyone is not native to Europe, and it takes very specific conditions to grow saffron. And yes, there's saffron production starts in England in the 14th century. Um, uh,
mm,
God, what is the name of that place? It actually is like saffron in its name. Saffron, someplace with a W, not saffron Wessex, but something like that. So saffron
mm,
comes from the Middle East. It comes from Persia, and the Arabs bring it. The Moors bring it with them to Spain when they conquer Spain, and they set up saffron production there. And then eventually, the production makes its way up north. But I have not found any evidence of saffron production in Ireland before the 14th century, and I found no evidence of saffron in Ireland being used as a dye stuff before the 14th century. People assume that because saffron is what becomes the popular color of choice, dye stuff of choice in the 16th century, is the same thing they've always been using for yellow, but that's just not true. So there's
mm,
plenty of not plenty, there are several native weeds in Ireland that will create a yellow. Broom is one of them, by
mm,
the way. So you don't need to have weld is another one. So you don't need, well, weld might not be native, but it grows there well enough. So you don't need to have saffron to make yellow, just because it's because saffron is luxury, right? Saffron is it's called the yellow gold, which is, I know that makes no
mm,
sense, or red gold. It's called red gold because it looks red. It's called red gold because it's almost as expensive as gold by weight in various periods of the Middle Ages.
mm,
And the amount of saffron you would need to dye an entire garment would not be minor, especially if you want it to be a deep yellow color. So the likelihood of people in this era having saffron to dye their clothing is very unlikely. It's much more likely that it's any
mm,
of the other numerous dye stuffs that produce yellow that were being used in the rest of Europe as well. But the other thing is, here's the problem with art. Art does not always depict reality, and the colors that artists can achieve with pigments are not the same colors that dyers can achieve on fabrics with dye stuffs. So
mm,
unless the text specifically mentions, see, this is where you need multiple prongs. You need your visual evidence, you need your documentary evidence, and you need your archaeological evidence. So, until we start finding fabrics that are yellow that can demonstrably, where chemically we can demonstrably prove that it's saffron that was used to dye it, I'm going to doubt that it was saffron in before the 15th century.
mm, mm,
As of the 15th century in Ireland, suddenly we start seeing an increasing preponderance of evidence for actual saffron dyeing. And the problem is that you sent me a text that's these texts, these medieval texts that have been translated. They get translated by modern people who misinterpret the original language and use the word saffron when they shouldn't
yeah,
be using the word saffron at all.
yeah. Yeah, we because
Saffron
myself and
Walden,
no
that
one's
was
aware
it.
about this. I found, yeah, I found a what was it? What's the poem again? It was Dermot and something. Anyway, it was a poem from the 12th century, and the actual old French, it was just
Yeah,
yellow,
it was
wasn't it, or
yellow.
something in the actual
Yellow.
old French. And somebody online had, what was it called? Translated it to saffron and kept saying saffron, saffron, saffron instead of yellow. And I was just like, "Oh, that's exciting!" And I was excited for it. And I sent it over to Rachel. And Rachel's brain is like, "What the hell?" Because she's going through the whole internet and she cannot find, because she, what is it? Rachel doesn't trust translations from default, so she went straight to the old French poems, and
Did.
she, for the life of her, could not find it online. And so she's having a breakdown. I'm just like, where the hell is it? Like, and I couldn't even find the original text. I eventually, it was like somewhere dumped in the background of what was it, the internet, and it was somebody's translation, and they just wanted saffron to be in there. So it's definitely a warning for the rest of us to be, when it comes down to translations, try to keep to the original translation,
Yeah.
which is funny because a lot of people that tell me, "Oh, I found the translation to saffron," these are the same people that will turn around and say, "I don't trust modern universities because they have, what was it, an agenda," and it's like, but you still trust the
Right.
translations? Like, don't.
Yeah. So there's a good comment. First off, Saffron Walden, thank you. That was the word. Good question. How close to reality are literary sources? So literary sources are definitely
Mm,
questionable. Also, now there's a difference between documentary and literary, right? So literary
mm,
sources can suffer from exactly the same issues that visual art can suffer from, because what is the
mm,
choice of colors that the author is choosing to depict could be symbolic. It might have nothing to do with the reality of how people dressed or what they wore. So yeah, Jan, I agree with you 100%. It can be hard to know, but by documentary, I meant like dyeing manuals that talk about how to make yellow dye using saffron, or um,
mm,
inventories, expense accounts that talk about purchasing, say, saffron in this case, in order to dye stuff, or paying a dyer to dye their tunic yellow with saffron. That's what I meant by documentary evidence. Like the really boring, well, for other people, boring work-a-day documents that really do actually talk about real daily life. That's what I meant by documentary evidence. Yeah, no, literary sources can also be real sus, sadly. Yeah.
mm, mm. But it's not all too bad. At least we have an idea, unless you correct, the leine looks like in the 12th cynic. So at least we have that idea anyway.
Yeah, I mean, this picture
Unless you're
by
going to correct me
Gerald,
here.
this picture by Gerald of Wales here in the left is possibly how Elena looked in the 12th century, maybe. I mean, you know, again, unfortunately, we don't have a preponderance of visual evidence for Irish or Scottish clothing from this era. So the few sources we have, we kind of have
Mm,
to accept until we find something else. But I always just like to point out that Gerald of Wales was not a Scot. He was, or not, he was neither Scottish nor Irish. He was Welsh, as his name indicates. And
mm,
presumably he seems to have actually interacted with people from Ireland, like for real, like that's documentably true. So hypothetically, he
mm,
should know, but he's not the one who illuminated his work. He didn't do the drawings. Someone else did those drawings. So the question is whether the
mm,
artist had ever really seen an Irishman in this case, or whether they were created a drawing based on Gerald of Wales' descriptions, right? So yeah, I people hate me because
yeah, it's up in
I'm
the
like
air.
the Socrates of the historical fashion world. I ask more questions than I answer.
Mm.
Pass me my cup of hemlock, please. I shall.
People just asking me about the reference there. Can you remember what reference I was using? Because I remember it was Dermot something. I can't remember if I don't think it was Dermot and Grania. I think it was Dermot
Oh,
something
for the
else.
you mean
The reference,
that scene from Gerald of Wales?
the one I remember I sent you on the
Oh,
saffron one where it said the word
yes.
saffron in the
Oh,
12th
yes.
century, but it was a bad
Yes.
translation. It was in
It
Old
was. It
French.
was. It was in Old French, and it was no. I'm pretty certain the name Dermot definitely came into it.
Yeah, it's Dermot
Yeah.
something, but I can't remember. It's not
No,
Dermot
no,
and
no,
Grania.
no. But
Yeah,
it was definitely about a Dermot for certain, which it was weird to see
yeah,
that name in French for me.
yeah. Why? What's it like in French?
Yeah, that was is it likely? Oh, yeah, okay. I see, Make Yankee. I answered your question as you asked it, probably. Yeah, I wasn't sure if you were
Hmm.
referring to the poem or the yellow dye source materials. Oh yeah, no. Shellback bow. I wish to God. I wish that we had dyeing manuals from Ireland or Scotland in the medieval period, but we don't. We have dyeing manuals from England, from France, from Italy, from Spain, but not from Ireland or Scotland. That would be, for me as a fashion
Hmm.
historian, that would be a landmark find. But that's the kind of evidence I would like to find to when that's the kind of evidence I prefer to work from to be able to make more
Hmm.
solid statements. Yeah.
just while we're on the 12th century, this goes slightly off, but it's still within the realm of clothing and stuff. When translating the language in England in the 12th century and in France, is France speaking Old French and England is speaking Anglo-Norman, or is it just both Old French? Like what's going on written
I mean,
language-wise? Is it
yeah,
the
so
same
the
language or?
languages are mutually intelligible, right? So the members,
Okay.
the I would say it's more at the level of dialect. It's not so much a language difference as it's a dialect difference, in the 12th century for
Mm,
certain. So in the 12th century, the French that they're speaking in the French court in Paris is the French they're speaking for the most part in the noble households and the royal court in England. Yeah, they're mutually intelligible.
mm,
Now, and
okay.
that's because in the 12th century, it's not just the Normans anymore, right? You've got all kinds of other
Yeah.
French influx at that point. You've got Eleanor of
Yeah.
Aquitaine, right? She does not speak Norman French.
Yeah. Because I was talking about this for the last 2 days because everybody's just going, wait, the Normans have been usurped by the un-Jews. Everybody's speaking the same, dialect of the un-Jews. So can the people from un-Jew talk to the people, the Anglo-Norman language in Normandy? And on top of that, Strongbow isn't even talking in Anglo-Norman. He's talking in Cambro-Norman style of Old French. So, like, how are these people
Yeah,
interacting? And important for us, what's the written language like when we're trying to get these translations out? Because it's quite clear to us that translations are wrong, especially if there's people are being biased and chucking in the word
right.
saffron.
Yeah, so from a language perspective, as far as I understand it, in the 12th century, most of those dialects that you just mentioned are mutually intelligible, which is to say
Mm,
that there might be a few like idiomatic expressions where one party is going to go, I don't know what you just meant, but they're going to understand the words, they're going to understand their pronunciation. Now, as you know, as the centuries wear on, especially in the English court, and they get further and further from the original French speaking roots, things start to change. But by the same token, in the English court, they keep getting this injection of fresh French blood. Right?
yeah.
So they keep getting a fresh French princess of some kind, who then brings with
Mm,
her whatever is the latest dialect of court French, and then her children are raised speaking that court French. So,
yeah.
it's sort of like there's language in the Middle Ages is so complicated because even in England, 14th century England,
Mm,
there's like at least 20 different dialects of English being spoken. Some of them not so mutually intelligible, by the way. And that's in the same country. That's not even talking about a colonizing language like which French is in the Middle Ages. So
mm,
how mutually intelligible they were spoken, mostly mutually intelligible. Written is probably more easy to be mutually intelligible because then you're not relying on strange pronunciation differences. And that's why any like the Middle French dictionary. There's an online Middle French dictionary for those of you who don't know but would like to know. And for any given
mm,
word, there's going to be probably at least three spellings. And that's not just because they were bad at orthography, which they were, by the way, or they were lazy about it. It's
mm,
also because that word was actually pronounced differently in a different part of France, for instance. So it
mm.
can be challenging. I don't have an easy answer for you, sorry.
Yeah, and it highlights how complicated it is as well as the comment section is pointing out. We haven't even covered the influences of Middle English
Yeah.
at the time because, okay, so maybe you can correct me on this one, but you also have clergy members in England writing in Middle English, or are they now writing in Old French as well?
Well, clergy members are mostly writing in Latin. So
Oh, oh well,
so
that's
so
out the
then
window.
then you have medieval Latin, which is also, by the way, a lingua franca in medieval Europe. So
Mm,
a lot of people still spoke Latin. It wasn't classic. It wasn't
mm,
Cicero's Latin. Cicero would think it was sad. Actually, he'd probably have lots of terse things to
mhm.
say about medieval Latin. But but a lot of educated people, all educated people spoke Latin, and they used it to communicate
Mm,
from court to court. So that was the lingua franca of the Middle Ages, was medieval Latin. And not obviously not, I'm not talking about, the commoners who are going on pilgrimage. So, the your Canterbury Tales people are not speaking Latin to each other. But at the
mm.
level of the aristocracy and the clergy, most of the educated ones could absolutely speak Latin. And that's generally often the language they used to communicate at foreign courts was medieval Latin.
Mm. That's absolutely fascinating. And okay, we're meant to keep the
Yeah, yeah,
clothing,
yeah,
and
yeah.
God, I could end up talking
Sorry,
about,
everyone.
what is Hiberno-Norman.
Sorry. Sorry, we wandered
Yeah.
down the etymological trail. I mean, yeah, yeah, Middle English is
We'll go
German.
into it in a
German
second.
English in its
Yeah.
heart of hearts is a Germanic language before the Normans ruined it. It
Mm,
was a very Germanic language, and then the Normans came in and did their thing. Okay, so let's look
mm.
at some other. Let me see some other visual evidence that maybe could be some of the reasons people think kilts are medieval. And unfortunately, I wanted to show you this one, but it's clearly not high resolution enough. I don't know what happened to it. Okay, so here's another early, Pictish stone carving, and again, I forgot to maybe. Nope, didn't get to include the details on that one. So this shows, you see here, what do you see here, Philip? Tell me what you see. Let's play the game.
It looks to me, and I don't. Okay, if I was to put it out there, and maybe I'm just so wrong, it looks to me that, well, he definitely has pants on. Let's start with the pants at least, right? So he definitely has pants on and shoes by my interpretation. But then he's got some kind of padded thing on that looks like a gambeson. Like, it doesn't, to me, it doesn't even look like a tunic anymore. That looks like a blatant large gambeson. I'm probably completely wrong now, am I?
I mean, yeah, I definitely don't see a gambeson, not in this period,
Okay.
not in this era. What
Yeah.
what I see from years of making garments like this is he's got a cloak on and it's hooded, which is cool. And you'll notice it
Mm,
goes to waist level, so that's fun. That's actually I
yeah.
could probably recreate that based on just this little bit of visual evidence. And but what
Mm,
is under that, to me, that's just a tunic that whose folds, it's possibly got a nice border on it, like it's got a bottom border to make it pretty. um and
mm,
and it's just a tunic again where the skirts are folded in because it's hanging straight down thanks to gravity. Because you also have to look at the quality of the carving, and clearly this was carved by someone who wasn't, he certainly wasn't Michelangelo. So
mm,
his version of freeing the figure from the stone isn't quite the same as the David. And so, you take that into
mm,
account when you're interpreting the clothing, because, I can understand absolutely why you would look at that and say, yeah, I see a padded gambeson, just like the kerns at the end of the 15th century, right? But when I'm
mm,
interpreting through this like this is another like 6th or 7th century piece of sculpture, maybe even earlier than that.
mm,
When you interpret it in the context of its period, and you realize they didn't have those kind of padded garments yet, at least we don't have evidence of those kinds of padded garments, and just making tunics of, with relatively full skirts, I can see how a stone carver would absolutely, you know, interpret it that way. But again, people look at that, and because they want to see a kilt, they see a kilt.
mm. Yeah. I
Yeah,
definitely don't see
right.
a kilt
It
though.
looks like the little fella is wearing a great kilt
I
as a
can
cloak,
yeah.
maybe. Oh, the little fella. I love that. Oh, a little like a fella. Sorry, I
Mm,
thought you called him a little fella. That's pretty fun. Yeah. So again, what we now call a great kilt started off as a cloak and a
mm,
blanket. And so, in that sense, the thing here that is closest to being a kilt is actually the cloak.
mm. Okay.
Is actually the cloak.
And you can see how that would, as we discussed earlier, kilting started off as a technique, not the actual cloak itself. So you could easily see if,
Mhm.
okay, so in this depiction, actually, is it debatable that he kilted up?
I
I don't
mean,
know. Now that I actually
maybe.
think
Okay,
about
keep
it.
going. Follow that train of thought. Where are you going?
Okay. Right. So at the point where we can see that kind of weird thing going on
Right.
is actually at the hips. So if there is a
Mhm.
belt there, then he actually did kilt it up. So that would, technically speaking, be a grey kilt. So he did actually put on a grey kilt there, as in got the cloak,
Right.
wrapped the cloak around him, then put the belt around the hips, and then kilt it up. So okay. That's
It,
very,
it could
very
it could
arguable
be
there.
right. The art
Yeah.
is not skilled enough for us, and also it's not even actually. And I'm not trying to be derogatory towards earlier artisans or artists. The other problem, of course, is that there's been
Mm,
a lot of weathering, right? This rock has been sitting out in the Scottish climate for centuries, and so it is
mm,
taken a toll on its detail. I mean, if you look really closely, you can actually see some what used to be lines in the cloak. So the cloak didn't used to be smooth, right? If you look, you can actually see the
mm,
ghosts of some lines running kind of diagonally
yeah.
towards that line there, right? I still think
Mm,
that the way in which the lines are differently depicted means they're two separate garments, but yeah, who knows? Like that's a cloak and over a tunic, by which I mean. But maybe it could be a big giant hooded cloak thingy that is belted, also possibly.
it's
But what
very,
it is
very super
definitely
questionable now. Go on.
right, right. I mean,
Because
but go on.
it's the fact it's a perfect line. Now I'm definitely like, oh, did we just find a great kilt?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
Just because I think my feeling is based on the way this artist chose to depict folds, for instance, I feel like the
Mm,
ghosts of the folds in the cloak would follow the same kind of lines and style as the folds depicted in the lower part.
mm,
That's why I feel that they're two different garments and that it's
yeah.
not a belted cloak. That's just, but it's just one little sculpture that's been weathered down over time. But but again, what the whole reason I included this was because it's art like this that makes people say, "Oh yeah, see, here we have it." And I
Yeah.
don't mean a great kilt; I mean a kilt, like
Mm.
doing the Highland fling, right? That kind of kilt.
It's exciting and tantalizing regardless, and it's
Yeah,
nice
it
to get
is.
different perspectives. Now, ultimately, I still feel like that's a hood or perhaps a cloak over the top of it, and then what we're looking at is actually well, perhaps a woolen over tunic on top of that. So perhaps that little line there at the very, 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 very bottom is an under tunic, the leine, and then
Could
over
be.
that again is the stripes are actually a woolen over tunic, and
Yeah,
then on top of that again, in my opinion, it would be the kilt. However, sorry, not kilt, bloody cloak. What was it called? However, I do like speculating, and anybody who wants to go into the comment section and counter my argument and say, actually, I think it's a great kilt. Actually, I'd love for you to, comment and definitely
yeah,
reply to
absolutely.
that stuff because I think it's exciting. To be honest
Yeah,
with you, I like looking at this and seeing the perspective, the opportunity of what it could be. You
right.
know,
And Martello says looks like a hooded cape and a pair of shorts, for
yeah.
instance. so I there is not enough evidence for me to say no.
But
But
this
yeah, go
Mm.
on.
But this is the thing. There is Pictish finds of hoods that go all the way to the shoulder, and there's even there's a perfectly preserved
Yeah,
child's Pictish hood that goes all the way down
it's
to here,
true,
and
right?
that could easily be an adult form that goes all the way down
I'm
to the hips.
I'm kicking myself that I didn't include that picture. I know what the one
Yeah.
you're talking about, and I saw it, and I thought I should include this, and then I didn't. You're right. Actually, now that you say that, that extant garment, that amazing extant garment,
Mm.
it looks just like that, Philip. Bravo,
Yeah.
man. Good on
This
you,
is
my
why
friend.
well, actually, I say the comment section. The comment section was probably just hinting at it.
That is no, that is. Oh, did someone mention that preserved
Yeah, well, they said
hooded
about
thing?
the hooded cape. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
my
no,
brain was like
exactly.
the
Well, good
British
on
one.
you,
Yeah.
comment section. I'm sorry, I missed that fantastic comment. Yeah, it does look exactly like. So if you all Google extant medieval Scottish hood, you might find it.
It should
You
be the
might see a
Pictish
picture of
hood.
it. Or Pictish. Do Pictish. Yeah, do extant
Yeah.
Pictish hood. Do extant Pictish medieval or just extant Pictish hood, and it should bring it up. It
Yeah,
is
it
it
popped up
is
right away.
it is amazingly preserved. It's got this fantastic fringe. Talk about blinged out, man.
Mm,
And actually, now that you all say that, that is what that looks like. You are so
mm.
right. Cargo shorts and a poncho. Nice, Bob.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, because we already have loaded depictions of quarter length pants in that era for
Yeah,
cattle raiding, because professional cattle raiders had to be extremely light because they were running into a rival to it being a king group, which was made up of a group of people who lived together inside of a small ring fort, and they would have had cattle, and then two rival tuits would have gone to each other and trying to steal each other's cattle. It was banter, it was fun for them, but to
Right.
be dressed correctly, because they're running around in the rough, boggy terrain, you wore quarter-length pants. In those depictions in the Book of Kells, you have them with the cloaks on, and then Gerald the Wales, he just has them naked, just with the quarter-length pants on. So it could easily be, as he says, cargo pants with the hood on over
Yeah.
top. That's why I love having this discussion.
Yeah, so there is this is and even like if you like you were saying, it looks like maybe he's wearing some kind of trousers, what are
Mm,
called trews in Middle English. So there's just like history is not a straight line, human civilization and our progress is not a straight line, neither is fashion a straight line.
mm,
So there seem to have been throughout periods of human civilization, periods and places where people, men specifically, I'll just talk about men because we're talking about men right now, wore what we identify as trousers. And
mm,
then that goes away and they stop wearing trousers and they wear something else. And in the Middle Ages, they go from trousers to hosen.
mm,
And then they go back to trousers. So, this is this is what I call a trouser period. The Romans have trousers. A trouser depends on what you define as a trouser. These three half length pants, or cargo pants, as someone called them, right? The Romans wore them. Um, and so, the many of the barbarian peoples wore them. We know because we have them from bog finds all the way up. And it seems to be the 11th century when there's a transition in most places in Europe from trousers, as we call them modernly, to hosen for men. There are, of course, going to be some exceptions to that. Spain, my baby Spain, you're always the exception, as Philip and I were talking about yesterday. And in some
mm,
parts of Ireland, it seems that they do either or in the Middle Ages, where some people are wearing trews and some Irishmen are wearing trews, some Irishmen are wearing hosen. So yeah, this
mm.
could, yeah, I mean, sure, why not? Why aren't those a pair of half-length trews, like the kind that you see the Romans wearing just a couple of centuries before, for instance? Yeah.
Mm, mm.
We had a question when, which I guess that was kind of me answering about when were knickers. Hold on, when who invented the knicker? Martello. If by knicker you mean like the knee-length pants, if that's what you're talking about, yeah, the knicker. If that's what you mean by knickers, then they go cyclically from like ancient times in the Middle East to not wearing them, to wearing them, to not wearing them, to wearing them, all the way up until the modern era. We still see now there are these shorts, right, that are kind of knee length, that could be for men, that could be kind of vaguely interpreted as knickerbockers, right?
Knickerbockers.
Which I think is what he means by knickers rather than underpants. You
We'll
put
talk
the
about underwear
trouser
in a
on your
bit.
legs and you get the hose again.
I
All right, got some fun comments over here. Okay,
mm.
let's see what we've got next. There's back to our Gerald of Wales, buddy.
Oh, we're kind of a mix and match here.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not. I don't know how these slides ended up together. They should not have.
Yeah, I was just thinking that. I was like, well,
I don't know
16th
why these
century, and the other
pictures
one's
are
high
together. They
medieval.
definitely should not have been.
Uh,
Everyone, ignore the 16th century Irish stuff on the left. That is not relevant to what I'm about to say. So
yeah.
we talked about how hard it is to find visual references for Scottish clothing, medieval Scottish clothing, but they are there. This
Mm,
is King David of Scotland, the first. And this dates to the 12th century. This depiction of him dates to the 12th century.
mm,
And so this is what, just like the Irish were wearing them, the English were wearing them, everyone in this era, this is a tunic era, basically, across most of Europe. You've got a tunic that's actually pretty long. If you look, you can see that it comes down to mid-calf on him.
mm,
And it's pretty full. It's got full skirts. You can see all those nice alluring folds. And you can tell that that's an over tunic because if you look at his forearms, you can see a fitted sleeve that is a different color emerging from a kind of half length, like maybe a little bit over the elbow length, slightly wider and looser sleeve. And you can see he's wearing either trews or hosen. Chausses, what would be in French, what we call chausses. We can't tell because all we can see are his calves.
Mm.
And he's got a really styling pair of shoes. If you look closely, you can see those are no doubt leather. They could be silk, but I think they're leather because they're pierced. They have
Mm.
really detailed pierce work. So this is really intricately worked leather, and they're actually kind of, his shoes go up like they're ankle height shoes. And, he's got this fantastic cloak on. The cloak is not over the shoulder because he's being depicted in state. So, do you when I say he's being depicted in state, do you understand what that means?
As in he's in his professional, as in he's declaring himself emperor of the world. Is that what
Right.
you mean? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He is Rex, right?
Mm.
Davidus Rex. And what do you recognize the two key symbols of Davidus Rex?
Well, this is actually very important for anybody who's following my Patreon and stuff. This Sunday, we actually have to talk about this as well, going into the reform of the church and so on and so forth. Because before the high medieval period, you do in the background have the idea of what it is to be emperor of the Western world. Because with the collapse of the Roman Empire, you have the likes of Julius Caesar and stuff who see themselves as emperor of the West. And as we get into the early medieval period, we have these over kings who are pretty much the king of these war bands and stuff. However, going into the high Middle Ages, we start to get more centralized and civilized. And so, what it is to be civilized is to have these people like Brian
Mhm.
Boru in Ireland declare themselves emperor. So, in Ireland, they have like the emperor of the Gael, but then you have the Pope who is recognizing these people and he's referring to them as Rex, as king. So, for example, in Ireland, although they recognize themselves as Emperor of the Gael, within international scenes, they would be recognized as Rex Hiberno for the likes of Rory
Right.
O'Connor. But because they still recognize themselves as emperors of their world, on one side, they will have a globe literally depicting that they are emperor of
Right.
the world. And the other side, they have the sword to show, that they have the strength to govern the world from their depiction. And then finally, you have the crown on top, which many people would argue is the sun, that they are literally the chosen, they're chosen by God, they are God's representative on the earth. And that's my depiction and my
Mhm.
understanding of what we see here in the picture on the
Exactly.
right.
And yeah, no, exactly. I was hoping you would say all of those things. Um, and yeah, so
Nice.
the point, the reason I wanted to emphasize that is that this is a 12th century Scottish king in Scottish king's attire, right? So this is how he would dress when he is, fully in state. So that cloak, that's why the cloak, in my opinion, that's why his cloak is here on the front and not on the side like that Lewis Chessman, because he's not a
Mm.
warrior about to go to battle right now. Right now, he's holding the sword of state, the sword that God has given him to deliver justice, the two-edged sword of, mercy and justice. And then, of course, like you said, the globe, which represents the dominion over the world. By the way, everyone, evidence that medieval people didn't think the world was flat because their representation of the world was a
Mm.
ball.
Yeah. Are we back to Alex Jones?
Right?
Are we?
Yeah, exactly. God, I wish. So we had some good questions. What exactly would that kind of footwear be called? Are they slippers? So that kind of footwear, that is called, they're called shoon in Middle English. They're called shoes.
Mm.
Modernly, we refer to them as turn shoes because they are actually sewn inside. They're made of leather, soft leather. They're sewn inside out, and then you turn them right side out. So we call them turn shoes.
Mm.
They were just called shoes. But they tended to be described. So those are not, their slippers did exist. Those are probably not they because they're over the ankles. Which means
Mm.
there's a practical level. They're meant to be worn. They're worn outside. But yeah, the Air Jordans of the medieval world for certain. Those were probably. It's possible they were actually lined in silk as being the king's shoes. Yeah. And then Takeda also had a really good comment. He said King David looks like his red cloak is a combination of cloak and clerical stola with the long trail draping over his far leg. And you know what, Takeda? I think you might be right. And I think that's on purpose. I think that brings us back to the representation of the king being God's representation on earth, right? So here he is in
Mm.
this garment that isn't heretically actually ecclesiastical, right? It's not actually officially a priest's vestment, but it hints in that direction. I think that's not an accident.
Mm.
What do you think, Philip?
Um, when it comes down to that level of clothing, to be honest with you, I'll fully agree with you. Like 100%, every single thing he's doing here is to purposely show himself as center of the world. But to be honest with you, I don't really know. I know enough to know that's if anybody even mentions, or he's trying to say that he is the center of the world, he's God's representative on earth, 100% most likely. But to be honest with you, I don't know. That level of detail. It's very, very interesting as well, because this is the period where these ideas, because it was the first off the Scottish that started to bring in centralization around the ninth
Right.
century with God, somebody's going to correct me. Kenneth, it was Kenneth that did it, but I can't remember his surname, that originally brought in the idea of centralization into Ireland. It was Mael Shocknall the first that started to bring in Ireland, started to try to bring in centralization into Ireland, but the was it the Enail Confederation didn't want to have any, the tribes all brought together, the two all brought together, they wouldn't have any of it. So they were trying to do everything to show that decentralization was the way forward compared to Scotland. Scotland was 100% pushing for centralization compared to Ireland, which constantly, even going into the late medieval period, pushed more for kind of a decentralized clan system rather than in what was it, Scotland. And it's interesting that this is the period of Murtagh O'Brien, who is recognised by the Pope in Ireland as Rex Hiberno as well as King of Ireland. However, once again, it was all the lot in the north that wanted to keep Ireland tribal and full of decentralization. And the reason for it is money. They wanted to keep the money in their pocket. They didn't want to be paying tax to Murtagh O'Brien. It always
Yeah.
goes back
It's
to money
always
and stuff.
always follow the
Um,
money, baby.
that's interesting. As the comment section was saying there, and this is why the conversation is going to centralization versus decentralization. Was King David first referred to as an over king, as a high king? No, I won't say high king because high king means over king of over kings, which you get as well both in England. That's the one. Both in England and also over in Ireland, where because you have people who are subjugating kings, eventually they become an over king, and then you have somebody who
Right.
subjugates them, and they become high kings, and that's why the words get bigger and bigger. And the Pope is there with his head looking at the rest of Europe, going, "This is a bloody mess." So he's having the reforms of the church, and as part of the reforms of the church, then you have the changing of, and this is why it goes back to explaining why are they doing this, is because the Pope is just like, okay, you're now God's representative. Okay, I won't recognize you as emperor because we can only have one emperor in the West, but you can be Rex, you can be king of your little spot in that part of Ireland. And so in Ireland, it doesn't work. That's Murtagh O'Brien. Murtagh O'Brien is recognized by the Pope as King of Ireland, Rex Hiberno. However, it does work in Scotland. The reason why it works in Scotland is because King David purposely invites the Normans in, who become the Lowlanders. And that's why we have a Lowlander versus Highlander thing. So the Highlanders, they don't recognize centralization, but the Normans do. And that's good enough for
Yeah,
David.
right. Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on. Okay, so now we're getting into more sculpture that where people look at it and say, see, proof of a kilt. Um, but
Well, that's clearly a
yeah,
kilt.
right, right. But again,
I can see why,
well,
though,
yeah,
to be
because
honest.
again, that what people expect a kilt is something with knife pleats, right? It's a full skirt with knife
Mm,
pleats. And again, I think, I needed some for those of you who are joining, just joining. The word kilt is not a noun. It's not used in the English language or any language. It's not Scots. It's an English word. It's not used until 1730 as a noun. It's not
mm,
documentable as being used as a noun until the 1730s. Before that, in Middle English, it meant to kilt up, to truss up, to take your skirts, especially women, actually, and pull them up through your belt so that you weren't dragging your skirts on the ground when you were doing dirty work. Right?
So it's not just applied to getting a
No,
cloak,
no,
wrapping
no.
it around, and then
Nope.
kilting up. It's also applied to women as well. Okay.
Kilting up was skirts, was women's skirts first. is all of the sources,
Oh.
and in fact, one of the sources I have, my cat has come and nestled on my my mobile device here. One of the sources I have talks about women. The earliest uses of the word kilt as an adjective in Scotland dates to the 16th century, the early 16th century. It's the
Okay.
earliest, but it's used as an adjective and a verb, not as a noun. So, for instance, a description of Venus. Actually, this is from a myth, a 12th or 16th century Scots myth. Venus, an active bow upon her shoulder bare, her skirt kilted till her bare knee.
Ah.
Right. So it's description of the goddess Venus. So again,
Mm.
not how real people dressed, but they're using, this is a demonstration of how the word kilt, the Middle English word, is used in 16th century Scots, right? Kilted, her
Mm.
skirt kilted till her bare knee, meaning that her skirts have been kilted to the point that her knee is bare, right?
Mm.
And yeah,
Okay.
and then in 1540, kilt up your clathes abone your waist, right? So take your
Mm.
garment and kilt it up about your waist so that it's not dragging on the ground. And then oh, there was a good one. Oh, I somehow didn't copy that one, I guess. But and all of these references that are for a woman, it's all women kilting in the 16th
Because
century. It's all references to women kilting their skirts in Scotland.
I was just thinking, the moment you said women, straight away the image I had is back to Gerald of Wales again and his women. The women in those depictions, their clothing is very, very baggy. It's very
Yeah.
baggy dresses. And in that, you can see the belt. Gerald of Wales actually shows the belt in his depictions. If you type in Gerald of Wales women, you can see a woman who's kissing a goat. And that's because Gerald of Wales has a thing for Irish women and animals. He's got a bestiality thing going on. Don't ask
Yeah,
questions.
seriously.
But regardless, yeah. But regardless, you can actually see the belt, and you can actually see, as you're saying there, kilting up.
Yep,
Well, I'm assuming
that is
that's what you
exactly what I
mean
mean.
by that,
Precisely.
is the fact that Irish women in the 12th century are quite literally getting their dresses, and because they're so baggy, kilting it up. My
Right?
mind is blown.
Yeah, exactly. So women
Yeah.
have been kilting their skirts had been kilting their skirts already for centuries by the time the word
Mm.
kilt finally makes its way into Scotland. The word kilt.
It's mind blowing because we think of kilting or kilt and we think of a male interpretation. I never thought about the bloody women's side, and I've been looking at these for years.
Right?
This is what, and it's only now that I'm like, wait, women are the original kilters? What
We
the
are the
hell?
ones, you
Yeah.
men copied us. We did it first.
Yes.
But because we had to, because our damn skirts are long and on the ground, and that's not always convenient.
Yeah.
You can, if you see me, especially at Penzic, if you guys come and tune into my stuff at Penzic, you're going to see me with kilted skirts a lot. A lot.
Mm.
So you're going to see, by the way, ankles as a sexual object and calves as a sexual object, not a medieval fascination. They didn't care about women's ankles. They didn't care about their calves. So don't want to hear any, ooh, calves and ankles. No, not a medieval concept. Sorry.
Mm.
Question, slightly off topic. Is linen more summer appropriate than cotton? Yes, 1,000,000
Yeah.
bazillion percent. Linen breathes and way better than cotton does, and is much better for evaporative cooling. Infinitely better. Absolutely. Yeah, go on.
And just to thank everybody in the comment section for the positive feedback and stuff. That means so much for us, to be honest with you, especially that opening when I was trying to turn on the subscriber thing. If anybody wasn't there for the opening, geez, it was
Rough.
crazy when we first started the live stream. There were lunatics. Completely mad in the head. And the moment I put on the restrictions just to people, the casuals on the channel and stuff, they just
Yeah.
disappeared. It was wild. It was like night and day the moment
It
I
really
clicked it on.
was.
Yeah, so I we appreciate all the good feedback on the channel, guys. It does mean so much to myself
We
and
do.
Rachel. Um, yeah, but back to women and
Yeah.
kilting. Jesus, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Like,
Question is so kilting is similar to girding. Um, yes, although girding just yeah, yeah, girding technically means to wrap something around your waist. That's girding. So to
mm,
gird your loins literally means to wrap something around your loins. To gird your belt, that's why girdle gertel, it's to wrap something around your hips, right? To wrap your belt around your hips. So kilting is literally the
mm.
folding up, girding would be the wrapping around. So it's kind of like girding is the action in this direction, kilting is the action in this direction, I guess. Yeah. There was a female burial discovered recently in either Denmark or Sweden, and her clothes were made of a fabric that has been interwoven with strands of silver, lots of silver. Oh yeah, cloth shot with silver, very popular in the Middle Ages as a very luxury item. Cloth of silver or cloth shot with silver. Yeah, do you know was that where to when was that
Like,
dated, Rick? Do you know?
yeah, because I was just about to ask that because that seems quite
Yeah,
interesting. I'd love to know what the name of that burial find is. Especially, you see, the problem is, right, with this sweet. I'm somewhat on top of the archaeology done in Ireland, although there's still a lot of stuff that's going underneath my feet and stuff. But when it comes down to Denmark and Sweden, it's like 5 years later that people are talking about this specific find, and I was like, "What? They found
yeah.
what? I never knew that." So when guys are referencing this, try to have the name of the burial and stuff for me so I can go and find it because nobody tells me about this stuff, and I'm just like,
Well,
"What?"
and sometimes this kind of news doesn't get beyond, like in this case, Denmark or Sweden, Danish or Swedish speaking sources, because yeah,
And it's really important
yeah,
finds as
right.
well.
It's like,
Like,
oh, burial of
yeah,
a woman with fabric shot with silver. That'd be nice to read about. Yeah. But by the way, for
mm,
everyone who doesn't isn't familiar with medievalist.net, I do recommend you check it out. They are very good at getting a wide array of medieval news out there, including things like that. And they've got a great podcast series too, covering a huge variety of topics with a variety of very international experts. Philip, also, you're also a medievalist.net person, aren't you?
yeah. Although I've been listening more to Gone Medieval, it's like BBC without a
Right.
agenda. Like they're brilliant. They're absolutely amazing. They used to be a lot of the people that work for Gone Medieval used to work for the BBC, except for there were too much agendas going on with the BBC. Like the BBC themselves turn around, their workers turn around and say, "Oh, I don't like." While they're still working for the BBC, turn around and say, "I do not like working for the BBC because there's too many agendas here." Like it says
Yeah.
it all. So Gone Medieval kind of a lot of the staff kind of left the BBC because of all the agendas, and now they stick specifically to medieval history. And then there's an Irish branch of Gone Medieval called, which is done by Maynooth University, which is called was it Medieval Irish Podcast, which you can get on Spotify. So if you're into Gone Medieval, there's an Irish version of that as well that's branched out, which is called Medieval Irish Podcast on Spotify, and they're also absolutely amazing. And they don't have an agenda as well, and they're funded by Maynooth University. Because the problem with a lot of these stuff straight away is if they're trying to say very biased stuff, which kind of ruins our fun.
Yeah, it really does. So kilt, so there was a question about the origin of kilt. So kilt, so it's a medieval English word, that it's Middle English word that itself in turn comes from Swedish and Danish, kilta and kilta. In Swedish that meant to swaddle, but in Danish that meant to truss or tuck up. So that is
Mm,
the etymology as far as we can tell of the word kilt.
that's
Pleat,
mind
as
blowing.
far as
And yeah.
pleat, um, comes is to literally to fold. It's a fold.
Mm.
Yeah,
Just going back over to Mick, when you say your Icelandic friend said Icelanders wore kilts, what do you mean by that? Do you mean what we're saying now about them kilting up? Also, on top of that, it's fascinating that we see the word coming over from Scandinavia because at the same time we have the word ridera coming over, which is
right.
Irish knight. And we also, within the world itself, we have the word Gael Gael, which means foreign Irish, which eventually becomes in the 14th century Gallowglass, which is the mercenaries that come into Ireland to go and fight the English in the what was it, the 13th century? Yeah, it's the 13th century, around 1260, when Brian O'Neill is revolting against the English around the County Down area. But it's fascinating that we have a play on words, so many play on words between Middle Irish and Scandinavian languages going all the way up to 1260, if not further up again.
Well, you know,
Like,
in the case of English, the history of the English language, you know, the Norse, the Danish, the Norwegian and Danish occupancy of various parts of the British Isles had a big impact on the English language. A lot of the common words we use now originated from that exposure. So window, for instance, is a Norwegian word, which is why it's got nothing to do with any of the continental words for window, because it comes from Norway. So yeah, there's those connections are there in English as well. So it's not just Irish that's getting, you know, having some pretty important words that we still use, you know, introduced. It's English as well, you know, and that's hence the word kilt is actually from Swedish or from Danish, from the, you know, the Danish occupying. Yeah. Let me see. They're reenactors. I would question what Mick says.
because he is the one for Old
Yeah,
Horse there
Old
as
Norse. I
well,
think he meant Old
just before
Norse.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
Old
right,
Norse.
Old
It's
Horse.
yeah, exactly. I I
Oh,
don't. I would
good to
like
look
to
at
know
that.
what evidence they have of if you. Okay, what do you mean by kilt? So if you if you
Yeah,
mean
yeah.
kilt like a skirt that's of pleated wool fabric, or what do they mean by kilt? If they mean a skirt made of pleated wool fabric and they're doing medieval reenactment, I really would want to see their evidence.
Because I put the word straight in and it just has 19th
Yeah.
century clothing. So do you mean 19th century reenactment, or do you mean what was it called? 9th century reenactment?
The golden era of Iceland, the 19th century.
Yeah,
No, I
maybe. I don't know. I'm sorry. I apologize for my ignorance towards my Icelandic friends and stuff, especially in the comment section today. But I just don't know much about
I mean,
Icelandic history. But I love it, to be honest with you. I do like it, but I'm just very
yeah,
ignorant to it.
I have touched upon Icelandic history and fashion, and I've not personally seen any evidence of such a thing. So I'd be interested in knowing what their
Mm.
yeah, their interpretation, why they think that's appropriate, because they're Norse, they're wearing tunics and
Mm.
trews and whatnot, in the first millennium, and then in the second millennium they're being influenced by the same kinds of European fashions everyone else is, so they're wearing, you know, kirtles and coats and that kind of thing.
Because I do loads of when it comes out. If it's 9th century, I'm really not sure about that. Because I do a lot of reenact when I was back in Ireland back in 2018, 2017 to 2018. I was doing loads of reenactment with Icelanders, and I never actually went to. I should have. I was invited over to Iceland to do reenactment over there, and I've never seen them wear any form of kilt or even kilt
Yeah.
their clothing for 9th century reenactments and stuff, which is very important because their clothing and our clothing, because of the likes of Nál Saga, what was it? We have the Orkney Saga and Nál Saga. It indicates a Hiberno-Scandinavian
Mm.
influence. So the influences in Iceland can be seen in Ireland in the 9th century as well. So their clothing has a huge impact on both of them. But I'm not sure if you're talking about 19th century or 9th century, because I typed in the word and all I get is 19th century, people dressing up in 19th century clothing and stuff. So are you talking about 19th century reenactment, or are you talking about 9th century
Yeah,
reenactment?
all of my I have multiple Scandinavian friends who do Icelandic reenactment, and they're definitely not wearing kilts. So I would be
Yeah. Well, not for 9th
yeah,
century
yeah, I would
reenactment
not, yeah,
anyway.
not for any of the medieval periods they cover. So I would, but you know, you can't prove a negative. So as always, I say I'd be interested in the evidence for what they're doing. Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. Let me see. Did we miss any more conversations about tucking, kilting, and whatnot? All good. Okay. So this is now we're moving on to, you know, you're recognizing some of this art now, right?
Oh,
So this is
yeah.
more of the kind of art that people look at and say, look, it's a kilt. But what are we
Mm.
really seeing there, Philip? What do you think?
No, this is very, 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 very important, right? So everything that we were talking about before is before
Right.
Braveheart, okay? Now we're literally going into the setup for Braveheart. So This is the year 1260. Brian O'Neill is recognised as Rí Éireann. He's recognised as King of Ireland. And in that, he's a huge problem because he is not governing the majority. Brian O'Neill is not governing the majority of Ireland, which he's meant to be governing because he's recognised as Rí Éireann. Most of his Ireland is being governed by these Anglo-Irish, these Hiberno-Normans, as most people refer to them as. They've taken over the majority of his island, and he wants them out. However, he needs to have a military revolution on his island. And so there's a huge change that's happened. So what we see here on the what was it called? The left side is people we refer to as Gallowglass. That are the people that live between the Scandinavian and the Gaelic world, the Hiberno-Scandinavian world. And so that's how they dress in this period. And then on the right side, we have more of an Anglo-Irish kind of influence that's coming in. However, this is the same way the likes of the O'Briens and the O'Connors are dressing. We can see that in the kind of coat of arms stamps that they have in the period, and also in their effigies. There's a lot of effigies around Ireland. So it's not just the likes of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers who have their effigies done in the 1260s like this. You will also see people living in around kind of the southern parts of Connacht, because it's more of a blur than anything else, and also around the south part of Ireland, the McCartys, the O'Briens, and also up around the, what was it called? The east side of Ireland as well, up around Dublin. You'll also see Gaelic people who are part of the Anglo-Irish world, who will also dress as depicted on the right side as well, which is more kind of as you can blatantly see, this kind of undue kind of Norman
Right.
French influence that's coming in. I don't know how you would in the 1260s. You'd say more of a French influence, wouldn't you,
It's
for
a French
1260?
influence. I mean, they
Yeah,
are Angevin basically, but yeah,
because in when dealing with Irish history, we just keep using the word Norman. Oh, it's Norman. That's Norman. That's Norman.
they're all Normans.
And
It's like it's the way all of the Europeans get called the Franks by the Arabs, right? We're all
yeah,
Franks. You're
yeah.
from Spain, you're from Poland, you're from England, you're all Franks.
Yeah, it's the same thing in Ireland where like some of these people are like because you have your first wave, which is kind of like the Cambro-Norman wave that comes from at the time they're referred to as the Knights of the Welsh Marches, and that's Strongbow's first wave into Ireland. The second wave, we keep saying Anglo-Norman or words like that, and it's actually the Anjou, because the Anjous had usurped the Normans at that point, and so they're the people actually leading this kind of large military force going from England into Ireland, and it's really mixed. It's not just Anjou knights in there. You have, of course, Norman knights. We have Anglo-Norman knights. We have knights from the Cambro area. We have knights from Brittany, which are very, very important in Irish history. And we also have, there's one more that I keep mispronouncing. It starts with an F. God, it's completely on my head right now. It's got like Flamige or something. Anyway, um, it's completely on my head right now. But my main point being is that the Anjou, the second wave, were very, very mixed. So we tend to just chuck Norman at everything. So everybody would refer to this from the pop history side as Hiberno-Norman, but it's kind
Right.
of more of a French, a broad French influence more than anything else that would have gone into the southeast of the island of Ireland, affecting the likes. So you do actually have effigies from the likes of the O'Briens, the O'Connors, the McCartys, all
Right.
of those families would be dressing similar to the right side, more of the left side. The left side, you would have more of like the O'Neills and the O'Donnells and families up in the north side of Ireland, which would dress more like you can see here. But these effigies in particular are actually of the Gallowglass, who were the kind of mercenary war bands that were coming into Ireland in 1260, because we can see more marriage alliances happening between the likes of the O'Connors and the O'Neills, to the likes of the McSweeney's in particular, have a lot of marriage alliances and stuff kicking off, binding a lot of these Hiberno-Scandinavian, Gaelic Scandinavian families together with the Gaelic families.
Right. So the Takeda says that looks like a quilted accaton or gambeson under armor to me, not a kilt.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct
Well,
answer, Takeda. Ding 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 ding. That is definitely not a kilt. Those are gambesons. That's protective
Mm,
padded armor, padded soft armor, basically.
mm,
Yeah. So but lots of people point to these gallowglasses, right? They say, look, they're wearing a kilt. No,
yeah.
they are not. Oh, Flemish or Frisian. Yeah, actually, that's true. I wasn't certain if you were talking about the
That's the ones I was talking about. I was
French or
actually
the
talking about the two
Frisians.
of them. Yeah. Yeah, the second wave was massively mixed, and that's why the clothing is very much of a French clothing in the southeast of the island, compared to the north west of the island, which still has more of a kind of Scottish, Gaelic, Scandinavian influence coming in, like,
Right.
that this is why I find the word insular so funny, because Ireland is still very much moving and mixing. It's not a case of people just sticking to the one spot and becoming insular, because the word insular gets used like there's no tomorrow, like.
Right, right. Yeah, it
Mm,
makes it feel like, they're completely isolated, right? The second
yeah.
and I get that insular, actually, I think it probably refers to it being island. It's like relating to the word for, like, it's an, Irish island, but
Mm,
still it feels like you're trying to suggest that there's no exposure to the outside world, which is not true.
yeah.
I think this is the lower of those two effigies is O'Connor, right? Isn't that
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
right.
I think that's O'Connor. Is the top one O'Brien? I can't remember.
Yeah, or is it or the other way around? Either way.
Mm.
Right. So I just wanted to, since you dropped those names, I thought we would mention them.
Oh,
So now we're getting into just after the Braveheart period in Scotland, basically. Um, and so these are two Scottish effigies, Highlands. These are actually from the Highlands, right? And they're very, very, very 14th century, late 14th century. And of course, here's the problem with effigies. Dear medieval artists, please stop depicting all men in armor. So, if you were a knight and you died, your effigy was in England, in Scotland, in Ireland, your effigy is automatically going to be in armor. You're going to not be wearing fashionable clothing. You're going to be wearing fashionable harness. And so, that doesn't really help us with how Scottish men dressed. But so this kit is like early 15th century, actually, I think. Now that I'm
I
looking
think you're
at it.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's still got a plaque belt, but it's full harness, etc. But either way, I'd like you all to reflect back for a moment on the armor that these Scots are wearing in Braveheart and consider that this is only 100-year difference. And now I would like you to look at how Scottish armor actually looked like in the early 15th century, right? That is harness. That is Scottish harness. That is how Scottish warriors dressed.
Mm.
Please banish from your mind this image of, I know there were the Gallowglass also who were, the crossover, basically.
Yeah.
Please banish from your mind the idea of a naked man wearing woad and a ratty tunic, and running across the field with no protection in an era when protection meant you wouldn't die.
Oh,
Um,
stop. I'm getting bombarded by that right now, because my page is one of my shorts is blowing up, and my regulars are perfect, but I'm getting all like we said when we first started the stream, when we had lunatics coming on going wild. These people solidly have the interpretation that the Irish are just getting drunk in mud huts, naked, covered in blue woad, and when the enemy comes, the English, they just run out and chase them away,
right,
shaking their sausage, and that we elect the man with the, which, to be fair, we did kind of elect the man with the biggest sausage in the early medieval period, because it's the era of warlords. That's pretty much how it worked. But now, as we go into the reform of the church and we go into the high Middle Ages, the late medieval period, the Renaissance, it's now more of a bloodline. It's
right,
you're the most educated, you're the smartest, because of your bloodline, not because you actually are. It's because of your bloodline, of course. You're
right.
civilized because of who your parents were.
I mean, that's how it works now. So,
Yeah.
um,
Well, who
um,
has the biggest money, right?
right. How higher on the ladder were you born? Anyway, so yeah, so we're getting so this is people were some people are asking me. I know we're talking about the kilt, but some of you are asking about, well, what did Scottish women wear? There is a Scottish noblewoman for you right there, and she's
Mm,
wearing a mantle that's open in the front, and it goes to the ground, and she's wearing a kirtle. She's wearing a coat, basically a fitted gown with very full skirts. You can see all those beautiful folds. Not a kilt. All those beautiful folds going to the ground. And even though it's very weathered, she's got a pretty elaborate headdress situation going on. So Also, please banish from your mind the idea of, this, and this, I'm pretty certain this is from somewhere in the Highlands, if I recall correctly.
Hmm.
Please banish from your mind the idea of a Scotswoman wandering around barefoot, with a raggedy skirt and a laced up bodice and whatever. That's not medieval. And this is how medieval Scotswomen dressed.
Hmm.
Yeah, please move away from that theory. The 5th century BC is not the 10th century AD. Yeah,
Yeah, that's a fact,
right.
because that's where, like, I always get that reference thrown at me is like, oh, but in 300 BC in northern Italy, there's a bunch of naked Celts that run into a peasant line to undermine it. And I'm like, yeah, that's the tactic for 300 BC. And the purpose of it was to get naked so they could scare the peasants off and then they could flank around. And
Right.
people see that one quote and they just go to town. Well, then everybody who is under Celtic culture must be all naked. Okay.
Forever. Never
Okay.
changed
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
big
Yeah.
clothing, just naked and blue paint.
Yeah.
World War I, everyone talks about the Highlanders who ran out against, at Gallipoli in nothing but blue paint against machine guns.
And the blue paint part is a different reference again. That's to the Pictish. Oh God, is that not the 1st century AD when the Romans are
Yeah,
advancing up into
Julius
Pictland?
Caesar.
Yeah,
Julius Caesar talks about them, right?
yeah,
He talks about when there's debate, of course, about whether he's talking about tattoos or paint. Like
yeah.
you can't actually really tell from his description. It's not clear. It could
And it
be
only
either
pops up
or.
once. And by the time you get up to the 4th century AD in the effigies, it's completely gone. So there is no depictions of tattoos and what was it? Tattoos and paint when you get up to the 4th century AD. So it's completely gone, you know?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so it's literally there just for a very small window. And then guess what? Fashion moves on.
Yeah. It's just you move
Yeah.
on, we evolve. Even in backwater Ireland and Scotland, quotes, heavy quotes, everyone,
Mm,
things fashion moves on. So these are more sculptures of knights of Scott. These are all Scottish sculptures, and I know the one on the right especially looks like a Gallowglass, right?
yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But these are all Scottish knights, and yeah, the I'm pretty certain the one on the right is probably a Gallowglass. At least
Mm.
he's from that part of Scotland.
It's the same families though, because if you look at who's depicting, it's always the MacDonalds, the McSweeneys, the MacLeods, and MacDonalds, McSweeneys, MacLeods in particular were active sending mercenaries to both Scotland and Ireland. So it probably is the exact same group getting depicted in Scotland as it is in Ireland.
All right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So again, you're going to notice the lack of a kilt. But what you can see here in the sculpture on the right, whereas before we had the coat, the male coat over top of the male hauberk, probably over top of the accaton, the gambeson. Here he's just wearing, it seems to be anyway, he's not wearing mail over top of his gambeson. He's got his gambeson, and that's basically it. I think there might be
Mm,
some elbow cups. It's a little weathered. That's the unfortunate thing of how medieval Scottish sculpture is, because of the iconoclasm, where they literally just destroyed anything that was vaguely associated with Catholicism. These things end up getting really, really weathered because they're just exposed out
mm,
in the elements. But again, some people have looked at this and said, "Oh, look, it's a kilt." No,
mm.
it's this padded gambeson, and you can see the
Yeah.
lines. If you really look, you can see the lines going all the way up to basically where his aventail starts. Or
Yeah.
I'm assuming that's an aventail anyway. I've
Yeah, it
always
is. It
assumed,
is. For
yeah,
sure.
okay. I've always
Yeah,
assumed it
that's
was
fine.
an aventail, but now I question myself.
No, it's an
Um,
avatar. It definitely is.
yeah, okay, great. Yeah, so again, no kilts, still no kilts. But again, this is art that people look at and they see kilts. And
Hmm.
we're getting late 15th century, again, Scottish knights dressed. And I think this is not just knights. This is like the Duke of or the Earl of Arundel. No, that's not in
I don't
Scotland,
know.
is it? No, it's there's this might be a Douglas, actually. There are we're talking very high ranking Scottish noblemen of the 15th
Mm.
century. Still no kilts. And I don't know why that's out of order. I have no idea what happened to my slides. Here is another late 15th century Scottish nobleman, and I had all these were labeled. I don't know what happened to my slides. Um, Late 15th century Scottish, and he's got this fantastic cloak on, and he's
Mm.
got a really nifty hat, and he's got mourners. Actually, if you look at this picture up close, in the under his body, you can see mourners, and they're actually dressed in clothing that is maybe more workaday than his clothing would be, because he's the earl of something or other.
Ah.
Yeah. So, but again, and I hoped I had included a more up close thing. I didn't. I failed. I'm sorry, guys. Something happened to my slide deck. I don't know what happened to it. Um, yeah. So here we've got, and I forget why we included. Oh, because we're talking about the plaid. So let's talk about. Let's swing back to the topic of plaid, and that's because here we've got an Irish king in a brat.
Oh, Art MacMorrow Cabinet.
Yeah, exactly. It's art. And he is, he's riding out to meet the English here.
Mm.
And so this is where there starts to be some confusion, because the word plaid, and we mentioned this earlier on, and if you all didn't see the beginning, the first part of our our podcast, whatever you want to call this thing, our live show, I recommend going back and watching the first whatever you missed, because there's lots of really good fundamental information there.
Mm.
But
Mm.
do you remember what I said about the plaid, Philip? What a plaid actually was originally?
Oh, are we talking about the original word for kilt when we get the cloak? Well, I was about to say cloak and wrap it around, but you were saying women were kilting before men were, which is where
Yeah,
they get their dress. Which the example I was looking at was if you type in Gerald of Wales women, you can see an Irish woman who's got very baggy clothing, and then you can see the belt, and she is kilting it as in pulling up around the belt, and then having the excess lift downwards, and that's kilting.
yeah,
And that was originally done by women. And then as we go into our understanding right now, once we get into the 15th century and we start to see larger cloaks in
yeah,
Ireland and Scotland, we have them wrapping it around and then wrapping it around the hips again, and then kilting it up, pulling it up and around the belt.
yeah.
So that's our understanding of the kilt so far.
And the word plaid is actually the word for the garment that the men were wearing,
Mm.
and the women too. But it's so plaid starts off as a blanket in
Mm.
original, and it's a Scots word, by the way. Again, not a Gaelic word. And there is, as far as I could tell, there doesn't seem to be a medieval Gaelic word for what we modernly call a kilt.
Mm.
It's not in the lexicon, and it doesn't enter the Gaelic lexicon until the end of the 17th century.
Mm.
So, or yeah, the end of the 17th century, right? And then it's the great kilt, which is this belted cloak thing that is a
Mm. Mm.
plaid. So plaid was originally a blanket in medieval Scots. And so it's easy to see how a blanket like thing, like the brat, could then be turned into a multi-purpose cloak-like garment that could then have multiple purposes, such as
Mm.
a tent when you're out on campaign and you just need a little pup tent, rain gear, extra warmth. If you injure yourself, you can use it to swaddle the wound, right? There's all these great purposes for it. And so
Mm.
the plaid, the reason that, and here's where the intersection comes in, the reason that plaid as a fabric, as a garment, came to be associated with the tartan pattern that we now call a tartan is because plaid was often made from tartan.
Mm.
But tartan, do you remember what I said tartan actually was in the Middle Ages and in the early modern era?
Isn't that when you said we were saying first thing that was mixing up it was tartan, as in mixing the linen and the wool together, and you were saying was that dated to around the 15th century where we start to see the tartaning, as in mixing both the leine and the sorry, the wool. So if you have wool and leine and you start crisscrossing tartan it together, because they would be naturally two different colors, that's where we start to see tartaning happening.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, tartan is tartane in the 13th century,
Mm.
in French, actually.
Oh,
And
13th
so,
century. Oh,
yeah,
nice.
13th century French, Old French. and it's
Mm,
linen. It's got a linen warp system and a wool weft. So
mm,
warp is the long on your loom. Those are the really long threads, and the weft is the one that you weave back and forth with the shuttle, right? So it had a linen system, a linen warp system, and a wool weft system. And so, yeah, like you said, like you perfectly remembered, even if you dye linen and wool brown, linen
mm,
is going to produce a different shade of brown than the wool will. And so, no matter what, you're going to end up with a two-tone effect at the least,
mm.
let alone if you make them two completely different colors, right? And
Okay.
so tartan was this pragmatic wool linen fabric, and plaid is the medieval Scots word for blanket, and the blanket plaid started to be made from tartan.
Mm. I was trying to ban an insane person early on, and I forgot to ask you. You said that's 13th century, so that's the period where we start to see Gallowglass coming into Ireland. So although they're not wearing, 13th century, sorry, 19th century kilts, they may have had tartan cloaks. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, but not just
Okay.
not. I'm not just. I mean, probably because everyone in Europe did. Everyone
Mm,
was wearing this fabric. Let me go to that slide 26. Um, yeah, everyone is wearing this fabric. It's not
mm,
just. It's not a northern thing. It's not a Scottish thing. It's not an Irish thing. It's a
mm.
Europe thing. So where
Yeah.
do you think this woman in this gown? Where do you think she is? Give me.
Oh, yeah, I've seen the exact same clothing in the Iberian Peninsula. So is she from the Iberian Peninsula?
She's Catalan.
Ah,
So
nice.
yeah, so we see this pattern. What is referred to by the late 16th century, as we read in that source, the first evidence of the belted plaid, uh,
Mm,
mottled cloth, as they say in English, mottled cloth, mottled meaning multiple colors, and so we have archaeological evidence of this fabric everywhere in Europe, everywhere
mm,
for hundreds of years. It's not hard to figure out how to make your weft threads one color and your warp threads the other color, and then for people to go, ooh, that's pretty, I like that,
mm.
right? Italy as well. So it is not a uniquely Scottish thing at all, at all. And in the Middle Ages, not even a little bit. Yeah.
And
Comment: pure speculation on my part, but I've always wondered if the great kilt really came about from a blanket cloak being field expedient trussed up to keep you warm while traveling.
oh,
Takeda, that is
100%.
exactly what happened.
Yeah, yeah, that's 100% what we think it as well.
Yeah,
And that the word kilt then is when they got the belt around. So there's different techniques. There clearly is different techniques to wear it. And we can see that even in the ninth century because there's so many arguments because of the Book of Kells where you can see the brooch in different locations on the
right.
cloak, which shows that they're using different techniques. There's not a set technique of how to wear the cloak. So we can see different techniques. And then in the 15th century, as the cloak gets bigger, we can see even more techniques being used.
Yeah,
One of the techniques, which was originally worn by women in dresses, is the kilt technique, which we can see in the late 15th century, where they get the belt, put it around these bigger cloaks, which they are referring to as great kilt, and they are putting the belt around the waist area, and then they are kilting it up. So
yeah,
originally, the kilt was a technique of wearing a cloak.
yeah. Exactly. It's the technique of of doing anything to your garment that involves trussing it up, tucking it up,
Mm,
right? So yeah, absolutely. Scroll
okay.
back. Ryan says to scroll back.
Oh
Scroll back
no.
to what? Okay, wait. Plaid equals blanket. Yes,
Mm,
correct. Let me see. There are fine effigies. Oh, those are effigies of Lord and Lady Bothwick. What are you referring to, Ryan? I think something went wrong with your comment there. Um, yeah. So yeah. So plaid is originally not a fabric. It's a garment. It's a thing. It's a
mm.
blanket. And then plaid is often made from tartan, tartana, tartan, right? And then eventually, I don't know, probably in the 19th century, I'm going to assume is when probably those two got completely.
Oh,
No,
the nine. It seems to me I don't specialize in the 19th century,
no,
so
neither
we
do
get
I.
it would be great to get somebody if we can get in contact with what's that? I think it's Kilts USA or something. They have a huge website on YouTube right now. We definitely at some stage have to get in contact with them and see if we can get them on board to explain what exactly happened in the 19th century. That because even early on, remember I looked up directly what is tunic in modern Irish, and the word leine is missing. I can't find the direct word for leine in modern Irish, but in
Right.
Old Irish and Middle Irish, leine means tunic.
Yep.
There's no mix up there.
Yeah.
But somehow the word, it seems to us, saffron, leine, great kilt, what are we? Plaid, tartan. They all seem to, in the 19th century, hey, look, we're just going to mash this together because they
That's
sound
right.
like traditional words. Bang, you
It's
know?
all going to be one and the same now. We're going to
Yeah.
simplify the
It's a mini
terminology,
skirt and that's that.
right?
Okay, there you go.
And that's it. Yeah. So yeah, so
Yeah.
tartan is also not a Scottish thing. And by the way, everyone, I hate to, Philip, do you remember when it was that tartans were officially assigned to the clans?
Oh, but that's an interesting because somebody else, yeah. If Ryan's actually talking, I don't think Ryan's talking about this one. At the very start, somebody actually wanted to talk about, what was it, the belts for the because we do actually. It's interesting as well that tartan does pop up around the 13th century, because at the same time as the Gallowglass are coming back in the 13th century, what becomes popular between the various clans, which is we're talking about the MacDonalds, the McSweeneys, the MacLeods, and then other Gallowglass clans, is they didn't want to butcher themselves on the battlefield. So they used to wear fishermen belts. And that's where this other mix up comes in with clans wearing Pacific
Uh,
colors. So people later on think tartans in the 19th century were the tartan colors of the 13th century when they weren't. They're mixing up the fisherman belts the Gallowglass used to wear in the 13th century, so they wouldn't hack each other up, which is the McDonald's, the what was it, McDonald's, the McLeods, and Sweeney's, and then a whole load of other Gallowglass families as well. So they did have clan patterns. It just wasn't. It was mostly just for fishing and on the
right. And it was
battlefield.
specifically limited to
And
a
there were
belt, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a belt. It wasn't like clans had Pacific colors for fishing and on the battlefield, and it was a belt. It wasn't your clan color. It wasn't a
Yeah.
tartan color for on the battlefield. There's no references of that. And the reason for that, so originally it started off as a fisherman belt. So you would go, so Irish and Scottish and Norwegians as well, and that needs to be added in. Norwegians and Icelanders used to go out fishing. So you go out fishing and then the waves get too bad, you topple over, you drown, your body goes missing. You then reappear somewhere else out in the North Atlantic, and people are like, okay, so who is this guy? They can identify him with the belt around his waist,
Right.
and then they would say, oh, this is so and so belt, he must be a part of this family. So they return him back to his family, and that's where the family colors
Mm,
come. It is not at this stage a cloak, it is a belt around the waist. The Gallowglass in
right.
the 13th century, probably early on, um, but definitely in the 13th century, just as they're going into the Scottish War of Independence, Braveheart, they're like, okay, we're getting the system to not hack each other up. We're already a part of the fishing. In their spare time, they're already fishing, so they already have the belts on. They wear the belts for the battle, and there you go. There's your clan colors.
Right, there it is. It's not a garment, it's a belt. It's a fashionable belt. Yeah. So I think it's in the
Mm,
19th century when they, and I don't even know who, that the clans get assigned specific tartans. I had some people are really disappointed.
yeah.
Like, there's not a Stuart tartan in the 16th century. No, there is not. Now, here's the thing. So people are practical. So if you're making homespun wool, which probably tartan was more likely to be a homespun wool than something imported from, say, Flanders, right? So it's going to be something
Mm,
that's rougher wearing, it's going to be hardier. So probably what that means is that you're going to use whatever you have easily available to dye your fabric. So that means that
mm,
the dye stuffs that are easily and cheaply available in this part of Scotland might be different than this part of Scotland, might be different than this part. And so that might lead to a natural differentiation in the kinds of colors you tend to see at the homespun level, at the non-import level of society than what you're going to see, in another region. So that could be a natural form of differentiation, but there's no official system of identification that is documentable before, as far as I know, before the 18th century, I think. Maybe even the 19th century. Yeah. But
Yeah.
meanwhile, down in Catalonia, fashionable ladies and gentlemen are dressing in bias cut garments, apparently made of beautiful multiple colored tartans, as it were. Yeah. So
When you say Gallic fashion, are you talking about the northern part of Iberia, Rick? Because I think we were talking about this as well. How much of an influence the north of Iberia has on Ireland in this period?
are you talking about Gallic, or Gallic as in French?
France? Yeah.
Like Gallic? Yeah.
Which is Brittany. Are you talking about the Brittany
Yeah, Brittany,
influence?
maybe?
Yeah, it could be either the Brittany influence, which is true. Desmond Fitzgerald constantly go back to, well, reference the Brittany influences as well. So, yeah, I see there being an influence fashion-wise between Brittany to Ireland.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know what you would
absolutely.
think,
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Rachel.
absolutely, 100%. And that definitely crops up in the research I've been doing about the clothing being worn, especially in Ireland, Waterford, Limerick, and Cork, right? Because there we have really good records that I
Mm.
can look at. And the wills, for instance, the kind of garments they're talking about sound like they're made of the same materials and exactly the same as the garments that they're wearing in the continent. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah. The
yeah,
Gauls is in France. Yeah, absolutely. Agree with you 100%.
yeah, yeah. So you're talking
Yeah.
about Brittany, yeah.
So let's look at some Scottish clothing.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
just
go
so
on. Sorry.
everyone. Oh no, I was just gonna tell everybody Brittany and France is the same thing. It's
Oh,
just the same
right. Yeah. Yeah.
shite. Yeah, Scotland and the north of France.
Right. So let's look at some more depictions of actual Scottish clothing from the Middle Ages. So in the 15th century, we were very fortunate in Scottish fashion history to have the Scotichronicon, which is a chronicle of Scottish history
Mm,
written by a Scotsman, calligraphed and illuminated and illustrated by Scotsmen in the period in which the Scotichronicon was written. So what we are looking at is most likely actual 15th century Scottish clothing instead of, what people thought people were wearing, or some what French people thought the Scots were wearing. This is what Scots people thought the Scots were wearing, making it much more likely to be actually Scottish. Okay. On the left there, do you recognize who that is on the left? The king who's kneeling there?
which king is that one? If it's the 15th century, it's got to be some of the Stuarts. Is it one of the James Stuarts? Because
Yeah,
there's a
yeah,
lot of
yeah,
James
yeah.
in
That's
there.
James the Third.
Can't go wrong if you say James.
That's
Oh, James the Third.
James
Oh,
the
you see,
Third.
no, I wouldn't have gotten that because I was going to say like James the Fifth.
Yeah, that is
James the Third, Roger.
that is James the Third and his son kneeling there behind Saint Andrew. I'm assuming that is based on the Saint
Mm.
Andrew's cross. Um, yeah, so this is how a Scottish king would have dressed in the 15th century. Now, granted, he is once again in state, right? He is in robes of state. He's got the super fancy cloak with the ermine mantle, right? So this is definitely not how your average everyday Scots, or anyone for that matter, would have dressed. But I just thought it might be interesting
Mm.
for those who haven't seen what medieval Scottish kings looked like. This is a portrait by Hugo van der Goes, so one of the best portrait painters of the 15th century, which also shows us how interconnected Scotland actually was, because Hugo van der Goes is a Flemish painter, and he hauled his ass all the way to Scotland to paint this altarpiece. So
Mm.
yeah, not just, not like Scotland is just hanging up there all by itself, not connected to the continent. It's very connected to the continent.
No, they're savages half naked. Did you not hear Mel Gibson?
Right. With paint made of weeds.
As he goes back to blame the bankers
Right.
again.
So
It was all the bankers' fault.
seriously. So the gentleman on the left there is an actual sailor. So this is actually a depiction of a Scottish sailor from the Scotichronicon. And I actually had some people asking me about sailors' clothing. So I thought they would be interested to see. This is a 15th century Scottish sailor. And he's wearing hosen, joined hosen, and he's wearing a doublet. The hosen are pointed into the doublet. You can, if you look really closely, you can actually see little squiggly black lines around his hips that are the points connecting the hosen to the doublet. And his doublet is designed in such a way that he has full range of motion because he's able to he's hoisting the mainsail, actually. So, right, so he can actually hoist that mainsail. And it's interesting that he's depicted in white. White is a cheap color because you don't have to waste dye stuff on it. So that
Mm.
could be intentional. Like that, the artist could have actually known, oh yeah, Scots sailors, they wear white clothes because then they're not wasting money on expensive dye stuffs. Or it could be artist fancy. But I'm pretty certain that what we are seeing is a sailor working. And this actually allows us to see what the base layers would have been in Scotland in the 15th century. And it would have been what everyone else is wearing in Europe, which is the doublet and the hosen.
Mm. So he's not wearing a
No,
kilt, is
there's no
basically what
kilt.
you're saying.
Yeah, there's no kilt.
Okay.
No kilt. This is, as I said at the beginning, logically you can't actually prove a negative. You can only provide evidence for or against, and you're more likely for. So these more images from the Scotichronicon, and we've got different people at different levels of life. But again, they're looking pretty snazzy and not a kilt.
And these ones are quite interesting as well, because in the middle of all of this, we actually have a bog body find of the middleman. And on top of that as well, we've got clothing that's very similar to what we're seeing in Ireland, which is even more interesting because this is meant to be a northeast influence we see from Scotland and Norway and Iceland coming into Ireland, when in fact there's actually similarities, what we can see in the southeast of the island as well, with the likes of the
Right.
Fitzgeralds and the Butlers. Like I can easily see the likes
Yeah.
of the Fitzgeralds and the Butlers wearing
Yeah,
this
the
kind of
the
clothing.
effigies that we get in Ireland in this era of the nobility, of the upper crust, or even just the middle class, actually look almost
Mm,
very, 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 very much like this. And yeah, so this is actually an Irish bard, whose name
mm,
escapes me at the moment. The gentleman that's kind of in the middle, on the right hand picture, the gentleman who's kneeling with the brat, with the mantle wrapped around his coat. That is supposed to be, as I
mm.
recall, that's supposed to be an Irish bard, actually, who goes and visits the court of the Scottish king, and does he's acting, I think, as an emissary, right, from Ireland. And so there you can
Mm.
see, and you're right, we actually have a bog body find, that gentleman, that bard, that looks almost exactly like that, like in the cut.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Crazy.
Like, do you think it's the same
Right. It's like
person?
it's him. He fell in the
Yeah,
bog.
is that his body? Yeah, yeah. That we actually still have his body today.
Like a good bard, he got drunk and fell in a bog one night.
Yeah, because we're assuming they're two different people,
The
but it's
same
the same
person.
clothing, and it's like, is this the same guy? Because there's another body. He recently got set on fire. There used to be a crusader. Just before he's still there. I think he's still there. It's just behind the forecourts, and then a criminal came in and set fire to his body. But he's in all of the literature, and all we know about the body that's behind the forecourts is that it's a crusader. But he's got no name. But yet there's another crusader who leaves the Isle of Man and then reappears in Dublin. And I have always been like, is that the same guy? And I'm now thinking to myself, there's a bog body find and his clothes are perfectly
Mm.
preserved. And it's exactly like these clothing here. And I'm scratching my head going, is that the same
Is it?
guy?
I mean, stranger things have happened in the history of archaeology, right? Good question
Hmm.
here. If you did not, or comment, if you did not say that these picks were Irish or Scottish picks, I would have thought they were Burgundian or Flemish. Yeah.
Yep.
No, thank you, Takeda. Now, there, if you do a close study, you might see some like minor differences, right? Like, well, I don't really see that exact style of galna, as it's called in 15th century English, the overgarment. It's not exactly the same.
Hmm.
Like, there's definitely some local flavor to it, but the silhouette is absolutely the same. Yeah, because the climate is the same. Yeah, and then a question: were there Jews in Ireland, and what did they dress like?
Oh, to what they dress like, I cannot remember. I'd have to go back over the because I was actually looking at this source 2 days ago. There's Jews that kind of go in and out of Ireland, but they leave again, and I think it's because they don't quite understand how the economy works in Ireland. Because the economy at the time is a cattle to currency. What was it? Cattle to currency. Um, what would be the correct word here? system. So it's a system that revolves around Celtic currency. So when you're inside the cities settlements, you need coinage up until the about the 17th century, and then in the 17th century you have the arrival of paper money. But for that whole period time, you need coinage,
Yeah.
right? If you go outside into the country areas and you're talking to a local king or anything, you need something to trade, because most of the time he'll look at your coinage and say, especially if he's uneducated, and be like, I can't use this. Can I eat this? No. If you have cattle, on the other hand, he has no problems trading. And I think the problem is people of the banking system, from the you see the Medici get in, the likes, not the Medici per se, but various families like Rachel can easily open this up, go into this way more. The reason why people from Florence get in is because they have the Desmond Fitzgeralds. So the Desmond Fitzgeralds are able to, and the O'Briens are able to work with bankers from Florence because they understand the system. But people like Jews and stuff who randomly come into the country and don't know how to introduce themselves, and on top of that as well, they don't know how to work with the system of coinage to cattle, they just
Mm.
leave again. And there's not just Jewish people that do that. There's the different groups of bankers that come into Ireland to scratch their head and go, especially Germans who scratch their head and go, oh, okay, I don't understand this system. I'm off again. The Florentines are very, very lucky that they have the Desmond Fitzgeralds. The Desmond Fitzgeralds are the ones who bring in the Florentine style of banking
Yeah.
into Ireland. Well, it's kind of like an Irish system, which makes the O'Briens and Fitzgeralds a lot of money. They know how to work with that system. So if you're into the history of banking, look into Florence, especially the Desmond Fitzgeralds, and there you can get into the whole history of banking.
But how does that tie back to the Jews? They don't understand the system, right?
Yeah, because a lot of the Jews that come into Ireland would have been working with the banking system, and because they don't understand how banking works, they have to leave again. I don't. In any other form of trade, I'm completely unaware and ignorant, to be quite honest with you. So I don't know if there's any Jews who arrive who were involved with any form of merchant in
Well,
Dublin. So I'm quite uneducated
so
about that
so the
sort of
Jews
stuff.
were evicted from England in the 13th century. Um,
Mm.
I wonder if I wonder if that eviction had something to do, if that was reflected at all in the lordship of Ireland. Obviously, not all of Ireland, because not all of Ireland was under English control in the 13th century. But I just thinking aloud,
Mm.
I just wonder if that had something to do with it. But I will say, so I can't speak for the Jewish communities in Ireland at all, because honestly, in my explorations of other aspects of medieval material culture in Ireland, Jews haven't been mentioned. The absence of an absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it's somewhat telling that that hasn't cropped up in anything that I've been looking at thus far. Um, but
Mm.
what I can say for certain is that Jewish communities in say the Italies, so in Florence, in Bologna, when you have, and we actually do have a large number of manuscripts, beautiful illuminated manuscripts from various parts of medieval Europe that were by Jewish communities for Jewish communities. And so they depict, they depict people in what would ostensibly be Jewish fashions when they're depicting Jewish members of,
Mm.
in history or in the Old Testament, the Torah, etc. And they generally are depicted to be wearing the same kinds of clothes that their Christian brethren are. So I
Mm.
don't. My tendency is to say that in general, it seems that the Jewish communities are not dressing differently from the Christian communities unless they're being forced to put on. There are, however, depending on where you are, some special extra garments or extra markers that Jewish communities were forced to put onto their person to identify themselves visually as Jewish, which also tells me that their regular clothing was not enough to distinguish them from the rest
Mm.
of the community. And yeah, go
Like
on.
like I am Jewish on my mother's side, right? Very small bit of Jewish. And that Jewish family came in and just became a part of the community. So I think you're bang on right that if you do have Jewish people that came to Ireland, they just kind of fell in with everyone else. Because there's no rounding up of people in Ireland, especially like Jewish communities and stuff. So if there are, like my own mother's side of the family, just little, you know, small little families
Right.
that immigrate into Ireland, they kind of, from my opinion, get digested in. I don't know any point where there's a large Jewish community that come in and have any form of, because there's no ghettos in Ireland in the medieval period. There is, like, for a short period of time, you do, in around the 12th century, you have, like, French ghettos and Ostmen,
Right.
Scandinavian ghettos for a very, very short time, but they're quickly digested. It just doesn't work
Right.
in
Yeah.
Ireland. Having people segregated in Ireland because of the fact that you're trying to survive hard winters, the segregation disappears very quickly, especially between Gaelic people, because they're king groups. The moment they see you, they're like, okay, do you have a daughter? You need to marry into my daughter. And it's not a thing of, he's a foreigner, I don't, blah blah blah, let's segregate him. It's like, oh well, you're an alien, you need to become unalienized. That's Gaelic culture. You need to be part of the king groups, because Ireland is made up of groups of people who are a fosterage, was it fosterage, hostages, and marriage alliances. So you have to be, the moment you arrive on the island and declare, oh, I'm going to be a part of your system, you have to be married in, or you have to be fostered into one of the families. Well, your children have to be fostered into one of the families, or you have to give, to make sure you're not going to start attacking people randomly, give up one of your children as a hostage into another group. So you have to do one of the three. And so, let's say, was it, this is around the 18th century, when I would have had a Jewish family that came in and married into my mother's side of the family from Poland. They would have had to marry in, or the Irish people would be like, well, you're an alien, you need to be digested
Right. You
in,
need. You
like.
must. You
So I,
must become one of us.
yeah, that's exactly, and it's called
Right.
Gaelicization.
That makes sense.
And like, yeah, for a lot of, this is why there's a lot of friction in modern Ireland between Dublin people and country people, because the first few waves of foreigners, from Poland and Nigeria and stuff, when they came in, they dated Irish girls, and so to the Irish psyche, that's grand, that's sane. However, we're getting more waves into Ireland, and now there's strangers in these little
Right.
towns, and the local country people are like, "Who is this alien?" Like, and they're
Can we
freaking out.
trust them? Yeah.
Um, yeah, exactly. Compared to Dublin, where Dublin people are like, "What do you mean? There's a person side of the road that's an alien?" There's a lot of friction
Yeah.
there.
I was just thinking, in my travels about Ireland, I don't recall seeing any medieval synagogues either. Um, so that's
Mm.
usually that's
Like the,
that's usually telling, because even though they might have been absorbed into the community culturally, certainly the Jewish people would have absolutely maintained their religion. They would have, unless they converted, they would have, and then they would
mm,
stop kind of being Jewish at that point. Unless they converted, they would have maintained their religious practices, which means a synagogue, which means either they built a synagogue in the Middle Ages if there were communities there, and then they got destroyed for whatever sad reason, or there weren't, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. So yeah, I don't know.
I think it's because there's no large
Right.
immigration into Ireland. I think what you have, it seems to me that you have, a few Jewish people that wander into the country, and then they become, either fostered to a family or they marry into a family. And then eventually, because they would have had a child, that child would have been Christian and then a part of the Christian society and stuff. So they may have died with their Christian, their Jewish ideas and stuff. Um, because Ireland has folklore and stuff. So to a regular Irish people, and I know this sounds very bad, but to a regular Irish person, that would have been like, "Oh, well, that's just your folklore," you
Yeah,
know.
right.
I know
No,
it
no, no.
sounds
I'm
so
laughing
bad,
because
but
I
that's,
understand what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Um, because all Irish people, especially throughout the medieval period, because it turned into a full blown argument where, people have this idea that Irish people, now they're Roman Catholic, now they're following specifically Roman Catholic ideas. And that throughout the medieval period, that's not really the case for Ireland. It seems that people have local interpretations of what it is to
Right.
be Christian. So you have a priest that comes in, tells them the information, they digest the information, and then they spit it out in their
Right.
interpretation. So it's not a case of they are now officially Roman Catholic. It's they have their interpretation of what it is to be
Right.
Roman
I mean
Catholic.
that makes it's pretty common. There's a fun question
Mm.
here. When was the woolly jumper invented? I still remember them as a kid. Ancient Irish fashion. LOL. Is a
I,
woolly jumper? This is the difference between American English and other English. That's like a sweater, right? Like something I would call a sweater.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a
yeah, okay.
sweater, but you could easily say a woolly jumper
Okay.
has its origins with an over tunic,
Yeah, yeah,
you know?
exactly. And actually, so the when is so the I think the defining feature of the woolly jumper is that it's knit, right? And so the question is, when did knit garments become really big? Knit garments as like main garments don't really seem to become common in Europe at all, in Northern Europe especially, until the like 17th century, is when you start seeing knit garments that are like body garments in as common. There's some possible
Mm,
references to what's called a petticoat, but that's not petticoat, not like modern people understand it. Literally, it's a little tunic, right? It's this little kind of vest like thing, probably, that's worn under the overgarments, but over your shirt. And there's some evidence that there might have been knit ones in the 15th century, possibly. So, I mean, I guess that could possibly be the origin. When it was invented, it kind of evolved, right? It's invention is a strong word, but I would say that some of the earliest evidence I have for a knit wool, in this case, vest like garment, is the 15th century is the earliest I have, but it's not really it doesn't become common, it seems, until the 17th century. And in this over the 16th century, there's an increasing incidence of knit as a style of material for making garments, stockings, and hats. And then eventually that starts getting used more and more for main body garments. So 15th, 16th century is kind of the origins, I would say, in Europe. Yeah.
mm, mm, mm. Just getting back to the photos, I noticed as well is that in this is
It
the
is.
15th
Yeah.
century now, but they're not. We keep going turn around now, and we've got this depiction that now everyone is kilting up, but actually, when we get back to the depictions of the 15th century, I can't see anyone
Mm-mm, no, and
kilting here.
here's more from the Scotochronicon. um, and we've got what I liked about this one, the one on the right, is that you've got this woman. There's actually women, plural women, two women actually on the boat.
Mm,
And actually, we saw the sailor, the Scottish sailor, a little bit ago. This is the other half of that boat. um, and so you've got
mm,
these women and their long gowns, and there's not really, there's some belting happening on the left side. If you look at the gentleman standing there on the left side, he's got what in French they would call an hupelande, in English a gown or a robe, and also a
mm,
gown in Scots English, in Scots, not Scots English, Scots in this era. So, and there's a belt. He is definitely wearing a belt, but it's not pulled up. It's not kilted. He's just wearing a belt. Right? There's no need to pull it up. He's
mm.
not working. If I dug through the Scotochronicon and found, no, actually, I looked at all the pictures. If there were pictures of people farming in the Scotochronicon, you would probably see women with kilted skirts. Yeah,
Okay, that's fascinating because in Gerald of Wales's one, we have women out in the countryside and they are kilting up. So it seems to be okay,
yeah,
that's fascinating. So the nobles aren't kilting up, but the lower
yeah,
classes
yeah.
are.
It's
Okay.
it's all pragmatic, right? It's all about, what do I have to do in order to get through this day as efficiently as possible with as little damage to my very, very expensive clothing. And if you're,
Yeah, but the thing is that people don't have
yeah,
nationalist culture at the time. They're not turning around to their clothing and went, okay, I am
yep,
Scottish or I am Irish. I need to dress in a specific way. The thing is with Gaelic people of that period, it's like, how am I going to
yeah,
survive? I am hungry, you know?
yeah. Yeah, I'm not wearing my Scottish kilt. I'm wearing a garment. I'm wearing a tunic. I'm wearing a whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Shell Blackbow, you should move to, like, I don't know, Antarctica, and then you'll be very comfortable in a classic English knit sweater. Yeah, so this is this I we kind of went a little out of order of what I planned, but that's okay. It's cool. It's cool. It's all gravy. It's all good stuff to get out there. Yeah, there is, again, if you look, I guess if you look, maybe if we go back, for those of you who can actually scroll in on your screen, if you look on the picture on the right
Mm,
here, the gentleman who's kneeling or in the lower part of the boat. If you look at what he's wearing, he's got what's called a chaperon in French, that really cool hat he's wearing. And the gown that he's wearing, it's actually short, right? It actually doesn't quite reach his knees if you look at it. And there you can absolutely see pleats, and And I could see
Mm,
how someone would look at that and say, oh, look, it's a kilt. But then you look and you realize, well, that's part of the continuation of the garment on his upper body, right? It's one garment from shoulder to hem
mm,
that he's belted and put pleats into place as part of the fashion. But this was the super fashion trend across all of Europe in this era, from Bohemia
mm,
to the Iberian Peninsula to Scotland and Ireland, right? This was the fashion trend. And so this kind of underscores the idea that pleats are not a Scottish concept. They are not.
mm,
And that they are not actually the thing that makes a kilt a kilt. The thing that makes a kilt technically is that it's pulled up and over a belt, which the great kilt is, of course. And that's, that's the
mm.
connection, right? So yeah, let me wanted to say hello and always cool to learn something new. Tim, good to see you. If you didn't, I know you requested a discussion of medieval Scottish clothing. If you missed the first 2 hours, 3 hours of this presentation, definitely go
Yeah.
back and watch it. You're going to learn a lot.
Mm.
Okay, so the next thing,
It's been amazing so far.
we talked about, and to cap off the Scottish part, because then we're going to get into the Irish saffron kilt. So yeah,
Yay.
right. So the people who are, looking at, well, okay, so when does the kilt as we modernly understand it come into existence? And that seems to be the end of the 17th century is when it finally comes in as the little kilt, not the great kilt, but the little kilt. And the great kilt seems to be born basically at the end of the 16th century, but it would not have looked it wouldn't have looked like Braveheart. It would have been much less stylishly arrayed. So I'm just going to recap this description, right, by an Irishman in the end of the 16th century, commenting on the Scots soldiers who were fighting under Red Hugh O'Donnell. So 1594 is this quote. And the quote is, and it was in English, they were recognized among the Irish soldiers, the Scottish soldiers, were recognized among the Irish soldiers by the distinction of their arms and clothing. For their exterior dress was mottled cloaks of many colors. Their belts were over their loins outside of their cloaks. So this
Mm.
seems to be the first. Obviously, it's not like this battle was the first time that happened, but it's just the first documentation. Probably the cloaks had been getting big for a while, and probably they had been belting the cloaks for a while, just as a matter of practicality. But it's not a fashion item.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah,
It's interesting because, as we were saying earlier, it's quite clear and obvious. As you point out earlier, women were doing it before men. And it seems to be in the 15th century. Like, it's a shock to the writer. The writer's coming in and he's
right.
specifically saying this. But to the Irish, using, as you can see in the Book of Kells, using different techniques to wear, like, even today, if I just wrap my cloak around my waist, you're not going to turn around and just, oh, that's an interesting technique. I've never seen that technique before and document it. Your brain would just go, whoop,
Yeah.
wouldn't even think twice. If that evening, if I said, did I kilt my tunic? Or sorry, did I kilt my cloak early on? You'd be like, I don't know. I'm busy with the cooking. Why would I notice that? You know? So it's interesting that now we're trying to look back and we're trying to find evidence, but we can't find evidence within the Gaelic because it's
Right.
natural for us. But we're looking at the likes of the Iberians and the French coming in, and they're like, hey, wait, they're doing something strange with our cloaks, which it is, to be fair. Getting your cloak and tying it around your hip is strange, like especially when everyone else is
Yeah.
doing it from the
Yeah. It
shoulders.
is.
Like,
It's right. It's like yeah, the first time I can recall it happening, maybe since antiquity, right? Like the Romans kind of
mm,
had a similar thing, with their togas, but that's been a long time ago. So yeah, so this is it seems to be the 16th century is the origin of what we now call the Great Kilt, but they weren't calling it that then. That term in Gaelic
mm.
doesn't crop up until the end of the 17th century, the Gaelic term for Great Kilt. And I'm not even going to try to butcher Gaelic for you all. So sorry if you tuned in to hear me butcher Gaelic, I must disappoint. um, uh, Maybe next
Maybe
time.
next month when we invite somebody. Yeah, when we invite somebody in who specializes in Old Irish, we do have to. If you specialize in Old Irish or know anyone who specializes in Old Irish, for the love of God, bring him on. Me and Rachel want to
Right.
poke and prod his brain.
So yeah, this seems to be the earliest, and it's but the visual evidence that we have, it doesn't, the little visual evidence that we have, it does not look like this nice little cute skirt with little pleats in it and this neatly draped thing over your shoulder. No, I want you to imagine it's freaking cold, and you've got this big massive blanket basically made of wool, possibly a wool linen blend, but made of wool, and it's got mottled colors, so it's different colors. Who knows what those colors are? Apparently not associated with any one affiliation, because that probably would have been mentioned, right? And you're just wrapping it around yourself, and you're putting a belt on, and you're kilting it over the belt. And okay, so there's a practical reason to kilt. Okay, so obviously you could absolutely just put the belt on. Okay. Has anyone out there kilted your skirts and or anything? And do you know the practical reason for kilting, right? So the practical reason is that, I'll try to show you with my skirts here a little bit. If you kilt not enough, the weight of the skirts below is going to pull it back out through the belt. So if you put a belt around a cloak, this big cloak, and let's say that you don't want the preponderance of the weight of that big heavy thing to be on your shoulders. You want the weight to be redistributed to your hips because it's a big piece of heavy wool. Then kilting it actually forces the weight of suspension to be transferred to your hips from your shoulders. So it's a practical matter of how this bulky garment is going to be distributed over your body. If all the weight is going to be just pulling down on your shoulders, right, which is not going to be super wonderful, especially if you're wearing armor and, other layers of clothing and armor, padded garments, whatever, because this is kind of getting out of the armor era as it were. So that's going to help distribute the weight of this big bulky piece of fabric across different parts of your body instead of it all being suspended from one part of your body. So there's actually practical application. Yeah, they could have just taken this big blanket and just belted it and done. But that's not going to help wear it any more easily, actually. And the weight is going to keep trying to pull down all the way from your shoulders through the belt. So absolutely, I can see why kilting would happen, why you'd be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to pull it up like this and there we're good to go.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I just quickly looked up the mini ice age, and it does actually start in just as we're going into the War of Independence. And that kilt. So it's interesting. I'm not saying kilt at the start of the Scottish War of Independence, but it's interesting that we do have, these starting to appear in the literature from the Scottish War of Independence, the period of Braveheart, all the way over. Now, I'm not saying we're default going into the Braveheart,
right,
and these battles with the Great Kilt on. But it's interesting that the foundation is there to eventually evolve into the 19th. They decide to get all of this and just smush it all together.
To secrete it into one beast, one thing that's easy to define and easy to identify. Yeah, so that's basically that's when we start getting the kilt is this, and the kilt, what people call the kilt, is therefore the part of the plaid, the blanket that hangs below the belt, right? That's the part that just kind of is there. And eventually these things get so big that they're like, we've got to do something with all this fabric. Let's arrange it in neat folds, which ties back to the pleating that you see up here in the 15th century, right? That's not a new concept, right? So the idea of having a great voluminous overgarment and using your belt to control neatly arranged pleats so that it hangs nicely and it moves nicely and it's practical is not Scottish and not new, but also is not perforce a kilt.
But it is interesting as we go into the early modern period where we have early modern militaries where we're switching from retinue to regiments, and everybody has to start getting, uniformal that we do actually start to see these, plaids going on, that
Yep.
we have to, okay, so now officially guys are getting to the point where they're getting their great kilts, and they, as a unit, because now they have to stand and shoot at each other, are being told, okay, kilt up your great kilt, sorry, yeah, kilt up your great cloak, and then we're going to plaid the bottom of it, so we're uniformal, a regiment. That's interesting that we're starting to see this kind of regimental conversion happening.
Yep. But it's all post medieval. Sorry, everyone.
It's dead now.
It's I hate to break your hearts, but there it is. If you want to be medieval Scottish, then you need to look like, the not these guys. You need to look like these guys. These are medieval Scots, and
Mm.
women too. Over here we've got a man and a woman, and or no, two men. That's a king actually. We've got two men on the left, and then on the right we've got two women and a man and some soldiers. So there you go. That's how real Scots dressed in the Middle Ages. In the 15th century at the very least. Okay,
Mm.
so now we're moving into the idea of the Irish kilt.
Oh.
So yeah, so we were going to talk a little bit about this so-called saffron kilt. So what? So these are Irish. These are figures from an Irish tomb from the 15th century.
Mm.
And again, you can kind of see how people might look at these and think, oh, yeah, that's kind of a really long kilt, right?
Mm.
Because all of those folds of fabric, but all you're seeing are just garments that go from shoulder to, foot to hemline, that are, voluminous and therefore have all of these folds that just sort of naturally form. And you can wear a belt or not.
Mm.
So one of the things that someone brought up, when there was a picture of my brother, from one of my brothers, from St. Patrick's Day, and he and his buddy were wearing kilts. And I commented, kilts aren't actually Irish. And one of his asshole friends came back at me with a Chat GPT answer to prove why I was wrong. Which, openly, the Chat GPT openly said, the saffron kilt is the traditional and historic garment of Ireland, having been worn since ancient times. So I think there's a picture of a saffron kilt here, actually. So
Yeah.
when does the what we now modernly call a kilt, this garment, the pleated skirt, when does that come to Ireland and become part of Ireland's?
Well, that Pacific one is dated between 1870 to around 1920, and it was actually the likes of Padraig Pearse, just going into the First World War, that romanticizes a lot of this. Ireland at the time is kind of in this funny mix of, you have the Victorians who are romanticizing a kind of Celtic people. Queen Victoria, just, she was addicted to anything that was labeled Celtic.
She
She would
was.
actually spend so much money. In fact, there was a find. It was a brooch that was found in Ireland. A very large brooch was found in Ireland, and they literally, just because Queen Victoria was addicted to Celtic stuff, especially from Scotland, they just labeled it the Tara brooch, and lo and behold, it worked. Queen Victoria spent a fortune buying this find, and then making, she didn't get the real find, by the way. They gave her a replicant, a fake one. And then
Wow.
from there, which is a very good idea, to be honest with you, when you're dealing with Queen Victoria and her clique, because you would have never seen it again. But she got the replicant, and she then made a replicant of the replicant to sell to her other friends, give as gifts. And then, because that got popular over in England, this exploded everywhere, that everybody needed to get that Tara brooch. So you had the Tara brooch, and also because early on, you had the Scottish who had their kind of Celtic revival because
Mm.
of it becoming suddenly popular again. Which is strange, because these same families are living up in the Highlands, and their culture is on the brink of complete devastation. And then suddenly they see a lowlander kicking about with the great kilt, wearing tartan, and they're just like, what? You've banned and outlawed the tartan. Why are you going around with clothing we thought were banned? And then they're being explained to that now it's the hip fashion. So now everybody suddenly is mushing this culture together in Scotland. The Irish see this, which is likes of Padraig Pearson stuff, and Padraig Pearson is kind of in a transition period where he thought the British Empire was great. Now he believes in an independent Ireland, and a part of that, he gets into Irish nationalism. And so what he does is exactly what Scotland does. He gets everything that was in the medieval period all the way up to the William Knight Jacobite War of the early modern period, and he just mushes it together, exactly what the Scottish had done. So what you're looking at here is pretty much everything from, I'd say, around the period of the Vikings, so from the 9th century all the way up to the 20th century, just mushed together.
Right. So I think the next picture has some more. Yeah. There we go.
Here we
Yeah.
go.
There it is. Yeah. The saffron,
So like,
the so-called saffron kilt.
mm, so don't get me wrong. I think it's funny because I still get pride in this, and there's a lot of layers of history in here. But I do get annoyed when people, first off, people assume this is how the Irish dressed in, let's say, the 16th century or the 13th century, because we didn't dress like this during the medieval period. But if you take the layers out and then explain each part of the history of this, then it's something to be proud of,
Right.
you
No,
know?
I agree 100%. It's like in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with what we're seeing. As a fashionista, I think
Mm,
it's dapper. I think it's great. Right. It's a question
yeah.
of what you're trying to pretend it is that matters. Now let me show the
Mm.
contrast here. So we've got the visuals. Okay, so here we've got here are these dapper Irish soldiers. Yes? Are these is this
I think I'm waiting for
no
it
no
to
no
load.
what we're looking at now, the kilt with the pretty doublet, is that the modern Irish saffron kilt? That are those military? Is that the Irish military?
But the
Yeah, they're
bagpipers are
military.
military. I think this is actually a bagpiper group, but a lot of the Irish military, both the Royal Irish Regiment for the British military and the Irish Defence Force in Ireland, both have bagpipers that have, the saffron kilt, and the bagpipers are dressed
Right, right,
traditionally. But it is confusing because a lot of people are assuming this is how we dressed during the medieval period, because they're skipping a lot of the key information of how people did dress during the medieval period, and then on top of that, they're mushing it
right,
all together. This is actually a perfect example of the what was it called? How people dressed during the 9th century and then on the 16th century, because this is from the Book of
right,
Kells that comes around the very early 9th century, just before the arrival of the
right,
Vikings. So you have a perfect picture from the period of the saints and scholars in Ireland. And then you can see the evolution of that by the time we get up to the
yeah,
16th century, because you can clearly see here, although he has a leine on and the leine is going all the way down to
right.
his feet, that's not saffron. It's not
No.
even yellow yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, you can see that none of these garments are really what the the saffron kilt, so to say. So, over here on the right, the leine is the yellow thing. That's the linen thing. But I would like to point out that by the actual definition as understood in 16th century Scots and English, the gentlemen on the right are kilting their leines. Because look
Mm.
at that.
But
They've,
they're still using the
They
technique
are
of kilting,
exactly.
though,
They're
aren't they, with
kilting.
their
They're
lainas?
kilting
Okay.
their leines. They've got a belt on, and they've pulled the excess up so that it's not too low. It's not getting in the way of their legs. That is a perfect visual demonstration of what actual kilting is, right there. And it's not demonstrated by medieval Scotsmen. It's demonstrated by 16th century Irishmen. um,
Mm. So this it still depicts. So even when we look at the modern day Irish kilt, it still has the history that comes from the 16th century, just nice and
right,
tidied up for the period. Because after this, we do have the period then of retinue to regiment, and that's where everything has to be
right.
tidied up.
Yeah. And the thing is though
And that makes sense that we do have the evolution then of.
yeah, no, agreed. I think the thing that is important to me that people understand is that before the very late modern era, the kilt was not a separate garment, right? It was not
Mm,
like a skirt. It was part of the shirt or the overgarment, or in this case, in Ireland, it was part of the leine, the tunic, right? The, the
mm,
the tunic, or in the case of Scotland, it was what you did to the cloak. You kilted it, and then the lower part was part of the upper part. It wasn't like a separate garment. So I think that's where people go wrong, is they might look at, say, this picture on the right and say, oh yeah, look, there's a yellow kilt and there's a yellow shirt and there's a red doublet. right? And
Mm.
instead of seeing the the red doublet is the inar, instead of seeing an inar and then a shirt, a lena, right? But
But it is interesting that we have a traditional leine here, right, which we also see in effigies all the way up to the 13th century. But then from I say around the 13th century onwards, perhaps, definitely on the 16th century side, we're starting to see people actually kilted upwards, getting leine that's going all the way down to the feet. Well, definitely around the feet anyway. I'll say feet for now, and then kilting it up to their what was it called? Their knees. That's
right,
fascinating.
yeah, yeah. So the thing that really changes about the lena over time is the sleeve treatment, right? So
Mm,
the lower part may or may not change, like sort of the part from the chest down may or may not change very much, but the sleeves do seem to change. And those big sleeves that everyone, if you look, you can see the pendulant sleeves that are coming out of the doublet sleeves, right? That seems to be a 16th century. I found the earliest evidence of pendulant sleeves I've seen in Irish depictions are end of the 15th century, but they're nothing like this. This crazy, insane, almost bigger than the body of the gown pendulant sleeve. That's clearly a 16th century development. So it's not, the lena is not this. I've said it before. I'll say it again. The lena is not an immutable garment that stays the same over 2,000 years. It just
mm.
isn't. Yeah.
Yeah, it does seem that the fashion and the way that people are wearing the leine does, like even the fact that some people are just having it naturally cut up to, like Gallowglass, for example.
Yeah.
I haven't come across a single example of Gallowglass putting together this sort of leine. They by default are making leines that are going to the knees,
Yeah.
and even on top of that, as you said there about the shoulders, straight away, I even come across a single Gallowglass having the fancy. Is it an Iberian fashion to have the sleeves that
Yes,
long?
yeah, it is. It starts in Iberia. Yeah,
Um,
it's something that crops up in the 15th century in Iberia, and I'm pretty certain it comes to them by the Moors, by their
yeah,
connections. Yeah. So yeah, and my theory has always been, which it's very recent theory because I only started looking at it recently, that it's the increasing connections with Castile
mm,
that cause, and Aragon and Navarro, that the way they're now doing their sleeves in the 15th century that reaches England and Ireland, and actually France and lots of other places in Europe by this early 16th century, and then
okay.
suddenly everyone wants that, right?
Mm, mm.
So it's,
Um,
yeah,
yeah, it's fascinating, all right. But yeah, you're bang on right. If we look at especially the effigies, the fashion style of the Lena changes so much, and even the fact that we don't have saffron in Ireland until the 16th century, then does question why do we have so many. Like, but even the color of the Lena, especially in the early medieval period, there's no yellow Lenas. Now we do have different interpretations of what's going on in the 12th century when we start to see photos of
right.
yellow lenas appearing. Like, is that because the artist is doing that, or is it because it's fashionable in Ireland for the noble and warrior class to have yellow? Like, what's going on here? And then is that why saffron explodes in Ireland, just to show off even more yellow? Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah,
um
it would definitely be conspicuous consumption because as I said, saffron is red gold in the Middle Ages. It's literally
mm,
in some cases worth its weight in gold, and it takes not a minor amount of saffron to dye an entire garment like that, a yellow that's worth looking at.
mm,
So that the combine that with the fact that it's linen doesn't retain dye stuffs very well, so it tends to be fugitive, which means it will fade. So you
mm,
might start with this fantastic, like you see in these soldiers, you might start with that fantastic yellow, but it's not going to end that way. It's not going to stay that way for very long.
so they're spending even more money.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like the ultimate inconspicuous consumption.
But this is what's funny is because in the 16th century, you have the English, well, the Tudors, who are coming in and justifying taking over and occupying Ireland by making out that the Irish are uncivilized, isolated people. And yet they're going over to what is now turning into Spain and spending an absolute fortune in Spain, buying all this saffron and bringing it back to Ireland. It's so when you're educated, it's so different, you
It
know.
doesn't, yeah, it doesn't, those two things don't track. But
Yeah,
as always in the case of Henry VIII, it's all a matter of manipulating the situation so that it's to whatever is politically exigent. So it's much easier to convince people to invade a barbarian backwards country than it is to invade one that isn't.
yeah, which is depressing in itself.
Yeah, right.
Not looking at Persia now.
So let's see. Comment. The bagpipes and tartan may be of Phoenician origin, with links to the Carthaginians and the Berber people of North Africa still play similar pipes, and the music is similar to traditional Irish music. So the bagpipes actually seem to date to Persia, come from Persia, as far as I
Mm.
understand. The origins of bagpipes is their original, which, I mean, yeah, then they would have also made their way to Phoenicia,
Yeah,
and therefore to Africa. Yeah, 100%. But there's and here's the thing I try to remind people of when they talk about, well, this music is similar, because history of music and dance is actually one of my special areas of expertise. Um, the thing that people seem to forget is that on any given instrument, there's kind of only naturally, obviously later more sophisticated instruments, this is different, but there's sort of naturally only a certain range of kinds of sounds you can get out of that instrument, right? There's
mm,
only, because there's physical limitations about how much you can blow, how quickly your fingers can move, how quickly you can change keys and that sort of thing, or whether you can change keys. So yeah, I sometimes, honestly, I sometimes think we might over attribute similarities of sound to regional connections. Say, oh well, say in North Africa, it's, the music that they play in North Africa is similar to traditional Irish music. That might be because that's just what you can play on those kinds of bagpipes, rather
mm.
than there's an actual continuous connection. I'm not saying it is or it isn't. I'm just saying what I've often observed is that sometimes there isn't an actual physical connection. It's just parallel development because that's what you can do on that instrument. So,
Mm, it's true, but it's also interesting as well, because if we look at the trade routes as well, especially the literature seems to reflect the trade routes, because we constantly see Coptic trade routes from Egypt, and even earlier on from Egypt, there seems to be some kind of. It's easy to get boats onto this kind of, what's the correct word for it now? But when the water starts to flow really easy, it seems to go from Egypt all the way over to the
oh, the
north.
currents. Yeah, the
Current,
currents.
yes. So
Yeah.
there's a current that goes from Egypt all the way over to the, just between Spain and Africa, that horn in between.
Gibraltar. Yeah.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Gets in between there and then goes up to the north of Spain. And from there, you can actually use the currency to get into Brittany. And then from Brittany, launch over to the Cork Kerry area. And if you look at effigies and everything around the Cork Kerry area, especially in the 5th century, suddenly between the 5th century and the 6th century, that whole area gets covered in effigies of the Byzantine Empire, especially from the Egypt area. They can find crosses all over the place because we have traders suddenly appearing and putting up, these Egyptian crosses all over the place. So
Right.
it's no surprise to me if there's, and that's why I'm always poking and prodding you, is there an Iberian influence here? Because it's so easy to move from the north of Spain into Ireland very quick. It actually, for that distance, it normally takes about a few months to go between Spain. If you were to cover that distance between like Scandinavia to Ireland or something, it would take about like 2 weeks or so. It actually covers 2 days. It takes 2 days to get from the north of Spain, because of the currency, to launch up into the Brittany area and then up to the Cork Kerry area, because the currency is so fast around that spot.
Right. Yeah, which is
Mm,
why I'm not, in this specific case of North Africa bagpipes and Irish bagpipes, I'm not saying there is or is not a connection. I'm just saying that it is tempting to automatically assume there is, but there might
mm,
not be. Yeah, that's
mm.
that's that's my whole point. I have not, the problem with studying historical Irish music is that it's almost impossible,
Yeah.
because we've got nothing before the 18th century. Right. And that could be because of those fires, those archival fires.
Well, but
Uh,
there's hope in that, isn't there? Because
there's
they
hope.
found
There's hope.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
For,
because
for those who haven't heard, Ireland they are restoring the Irish National Library. I don't remember who's doing the restoration
it's
work.
the Royal Academy, isn't it?
Royal Academy. Yeah. They have restored and are continuing to restore thousands of documents that were burnt up in the 1922 archive fires in Dublin during the revolution. God damn you, revolutionaries, stop burning shit up.
It was
Um,
the Irish Civil War between the
yeah,
anti-treaty and the treaty. They were
yeah,
disagreeing on if you should be under home rule or not with the British.
right.
How
Yeah,
should we be free? Let's kill each other.
right. Yeah, that's right. We'll settle this the old fashioned way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Freedom through violence. So
It was
anyway,
actually it was actually an accident. They didn't even mean to do it. It
I
was
know, I know. That's the word. It's almost that makes it worse almost. It's like this didn't
mm,
have to happen, did it? Huh? Huh?
yeah.
So they're now restoring these thousands upon thousands of medieval documents, and they will be digitally available and searchable because they will also be available in transcription and translation. So that's big news. So who knows? Maybe we will finally find some actual medieval Irish music. Could
Mm,
happen. But
hopefully.
the point is that we honestly don't know how medieval Irish music sounded. And to assume, it's frankly insulting to Irish people to assume that it sounds the same as traditional Irish music now.
The one in Africa and the one in Ireland. I think Ireland is slower, and I think my wife last night said it was a little bit more depressingist. It's actually a guy actually lives in my town. His name is Johnny Bongos, and he actually he has more of the African style, and it's to the locals. It is so different to the Irish style. So if you're into that kind of stuff from a modern perspective, definitely look up Johnny Bongos. He would specialize in that.
It's pretty cool. His name is actually Bongos.
Yes, and the reason for bongos actually is a play on words for the locals on Africa because it's more like a bongo beat than an
Right,
Irish beat. Yeah.
right. That's pretty funny. That's awesome. Yeah, I guess so. I guess my point is that I think it's wrongheaded to assume that so-called traditional Irish music is the same as historical Irish music.
Mm,
In fact, I've pointed this out in other aspects of medieval material culture or in general that a folk tradition
mm.
is actually more likely to evolve and change than a court tradition because a court tradition is generally ruled by rules
I
and
think
it's written down and it's transmitted by writing, but folk traditions tend to be just subject to the creativity of the person participating in the craft or the art or the performance. And there's a lot of the grapevine effect that also takes effect. So, well,
mm.
I learned this tune from my dad, but I'm going to now add my little thing to it. And
You
then
see,
my
yeah,
son's going to learn that from me, and then he's going to add his own little thing to it, you know?
yeah, you see, that's the problem we have with Follow Me Up the Carlo. So, Follow Me Up the Carlo survived in the 16th century. I think it's around 1580. You have Follow Me Up the Carlo, and it's a song brought down by the O'Byrnes. So, the O'Byrnes created Follow Me Up the Carlo, but the surviving version doesn't even have words. The words were added on much later on.
Right.
We don't even know what the original words were. Like Follow Me Up the Carlo, it's a modern interpretation that starts arguments all the time. Now, I don't specialize in music, so I'm not going to tell you how much it changed from the 16th century around 1580 to now. But yeah, if you want to have somewhat of an idea of what a medieval song is, definitely look up Follow Me Up the Carol, but be advised it's a modern interpretation that starts a lot of arguments.
Yeah, I think the tune dates to the end of the 16th century, right? Like that's
Mm,
the earliest documentation for it. Yeah,
yeah. And I don't think we have any other surviving songs in Ireland other than Follow Me Up the Carly. Do we, Yuki?
I
We don't
haven't.
have any medieval songs in Ireland. We just have Follow Me Up the Carlo, isn't it? Yeah.
It would be a pleasant surprise for me if you had said yes,
I
because
wish I said yes.
I, I have looked into it and I haven't found anything. And it's the same frustrating thing for dance.
Mm,
What the so-called river dance, not medieval, guys,
yeah.
not medieval.
I think
And
that we were talking about this last time as well, and we think there might be a quote unquote Anglo-Norman influence
yeah,
in there, but that's all we can find. Because when I was looking at it personally, there seems to be when the Normans are in there. Well, I say Anglo. I should really say Anglo-Irish when they're in their tower houses and stuff, and early on Mountain Baileys, and they're having our guests come in. They seem to have some kind of dance performance that happens but I doubt it looked anything like Riverdance today, to be quite honest with you, especially if it's meant to be of an Anglo the Anglo-Norman influence, Anglo-Irish influence.
So William Hunts the Holman says oldest archaeological evidence for pipes in quotes found anywhere is Ireland 4,000 years BP. Well, pipes, I guess it depends on what you mean by pipes. I know I've seen Paleolithic pipes from Africa.
Mm.
So just like the actual pipes, like a rod with a hole drilled down through the center and little holes on top for actually getting different notes out of it. Are you talking about pipes, or it'd be very interesting if the bag had actually survived that long? Or is the evidence not the pipes themselves, but maybe like depictions of someone playing something like a bagpipe? Oh, Kaylee, welcome. Good to see you. So definitely, Kaylee, you're going to want to watch the previous almost 4 hours.
Oh yeah, especially the start where all the weirdos coming
Oh
out.
my
There
God.
was
I don't know.
weirdos at the start.
I'm tempted because I got a little angry at that waste of humanity who didn't belong in our chat.
Mm.
I might delete that first part.
Yeah, it's probably best. They were
I think
just because I was still putting in my settings because it didn't connect properly between myself and
right.
Rachel. So my security side, my stream suddenly blew up, and we had the weirdest
Trolls,
people rock up.
nasty people.
Oh, completely brainwashed. Because
Yeah.
they kept poking in brainwash stuff in there,
Ugh.
and
I
yeah,
got
they were just
accused of
off
being
the.
Canadian, everyone who wasn't
Yeah,
there for that part of the stream. I was accused with 4-letter words called a Canadian. Yeah, it was interesting.
yeah, but you can tell the level of if a person's not used to different accents, it can show how brainwashed they are. Like,
Yeah, it's like, oh, you don't sound like you are from this part, so you must be Canadian. No, I'm very
mm,
much from the Mid-Atlantic region of the United States. Thank you very much, and proud Delawarean.
mm.
Okay, so actually, I think that's all we had specifically on the myth of the kilt. Okay, so everyone, final questions. Do you have any questions that you'd like to ask? If you didn't, if you joined midstream, I highly recommend that you go back and watch from the beginning, but maybe skip over the first 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Now everyone's going to want to see what happened during the first 5 minutes.
yeah, I know, right?
Yeah, but definitely we got some really good information out there almost from the beginning. Go check that out. And otherwise, we're just gonna leave it for another minute or two for any final questions. We really appreciate you all joining us today. Like and subscribe, Philip from Irish Medieval History and the Creative Contessa. And this is going to be part of a series because we've got so many myths,
All
so many
right.
myths to bust. It's so bad, the kind of
Mm.
crappy information that is out there.
Plus,
Yeah.
we're looking to go more live anyway, so yeah, might as well do a whole series of myth busting now.
Yeah, I
Medieval
mean
myth busting, everyone.
it's there's so many wrong-headed ideas out there, and what better way to present the right information than in a myth busting series? Yeah.
Okay, so it's gonna be our Saturday thing from now on, myth busting Saturday.
Yeah, that's right, myth
Because
busting
we're
Saturday.
we're we're thinking about doing what was it, medieval news on Tuesdays,
Yeah, or
and yeah,
a casual medieval. Yeah. So when I don't we haven't talked schedules yet, but
I'm going to, for people listening in, what I'm doing, and I've been talking to a few people. Rachel's been in there. I'm talking to Bertie about that. I'm going to start doing, and Rachel's already doing way more live streams, but I'm going to start jumping more on the bandwagon when I come back from mainland Japan somewhere around August, probably after August 7th. I'll start doing way more live streams and stuff just because the algorithm has completely gone away. Like, and it's not just myself, the whole medieval community seems to have got
yeah,
bounced out of making regular videos.
yeah.
I'm not going to go into details about it because I'll get into trouble with people on the top. But regardless, live streaming and shorts are the way forward right now. So we're going to do way more live
Yeah.
streams. Rachel's already fully in there, and you can see subscribe. Like, if you haven't already subscribed, definitely subscribe now. But Rachel's subscriptions are flying through the roof right now. So it definitely is working. So I'm going to do more kind of TV shows ish live streams, and going to have some teams in there. So we're definitely, yeah, myth busting on Saturday seems to be a way forward.
Yeah, it
Medieval
seems
myth
to be a
busting.
good one,
Yeah,
and definitely I like the idea. So Philip and I were talking about, and I think you guys would enjoy this. Us having a casual medieval chat on Tuesday mornings our
yeah.
time, but wherever you are in the world your time, where we'll talk about medieval news. We'll field questions from you. It'll be very casual, no visual references or anything, just
Well,
us.
I might have a few visuals in there,
Okay, we
maybe.
might have some
Yeah,
visuals
I'll
then.
put together because I love visuals, maps. Give me. Oof. I'll see if I can put together something on the Monday for you
Yeah.
guys. On the Tuesday, it'll be Tuesday for us. It'll be Monday night for you guys.
Okay, so let me see if we got any. There was a good question there. Hold on, we got a couple of questions. Good, good, good. Hold on. Archives. Why did they burn? My mouse is not working.
The one
Hold on.
in
How
the
did the archives intentionally burn? Philip, would you like to step in there as our native Irish historian?
If you're talking about the one in Ireland for the
Yeah,
forecourt, that was during the Irish Civil War. You had the treaty versus non-treaty side, and they were both arguing how to be independent under the British establishment, because we had literally just Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera had terrorized the British establishment. Well, vice versa, the British were doing it to us as well. Bloody Sunday being a very good example of that, where the British retaliated in a very stupid way. Regardless, it eventually led to Britain negotiating our home rule bills, and an argument kicked off between one half of the Irish Parliament and the other half. So it became the non-treaty versus the treaty side, and eventually it came down to a siege in Dublin called the Siege of the Four Courts. And inside of the Four Courts was all the medieval literature. Now, they had brought all the medieval literature together and put them into the Four Courts to protect them. Now, the anti treaty side had gone inside and used it to protect themselves, completely ignoring the fact all the medieval literature was in there. And Collins was put under pressure from international, from like America and Britain and stuff, to get these guys out because they considered them to be terrorists. So they branded them as terrorists and were like to Collins, who Collins at the time was head of the, what was it? He was prime minister at the time, and he was also head of the military. So he was told, so he himself was told he had to go in there and physically get them out. So he had to pretty much blow up the Four Courts. So during the siege itself, if you watch the video on YouTube, just type in the siege of Four Courts on YouTube, you can see snow. That's not snow.
it's not
That's
snow.
actually, yeah, it's burning literature,
Yeah,
which has been blown apart by the artillery. No, this wasn't. They weren't doing this on purpose, allegedly. What happened is the shell went too far over the actual fortification itself of the forecourts and went into the building itself and set fire. So it ended up burning the Irish medieval literature, which is completely despicable, because so much of it had actually, because it was uncentralized, it was decentralized, and Ireland had because they had the clan system during the late medieval period, there was a lot of literature within the castles themselves. So not a lot of it had been destroyed by Cromwell early on. A lot of it were destroyed in the monastic settlements.
yeah.
However, the individual ones within the tower houses owned by clans, they were, perfectly fine. So they brought them to the forecourts, and then that's where they end up being blown up.
There it is. No more expense
Because
accounts, no more inventories. Yeah, so sad.
absolutely disturbing.
Yeah. Then we had another question. What was it that the Iberians did with their sleeves that caught on in England? I didn't hear well. So, in the 15th century, the Iberians started basically their linen sleeves. So imagine this linen sleeve, but way more open, like an angel wing, basically. And they started doing black work and white work on them and red work on them. So beautiful embroidery all along them. But they made these sleeves were super huge, really big, and they were purposefully just like you see in. They actually looked almost exactly like. Oh wait, maybe we don't have this here in this presentation. They looked almost exactly like the ones you see women wearing in 16th century England, Ireland, except that they weren't yellow in the Iberian Peninsula. So they basically took their camisa sleeves, their shirt sleeves. What is the shirt? This thing. And just made them super voluminous and covered them in embroidery. And that style of having really voluminous camisa shirt smock sleeves caught on everywhere. Caught on in Italy, caught on in France, caught on in England, caught on in Spain. Of course, in England, it caught on because Catherine of Aragon, Caterina de Aragona, came, married Arthur and then Henry, and all of her ladies came with her, and that just set the fashion. And I'm pretty certain that's the same fashion that led to the leine, the 16th century Irish leine, taking on these big sleeves. I think that's probably where that came from. Yeah.
Mm.
Let me see. Okay, any other questions we've got here? What was it?
Yeah, Tom
Okay,
often
yeah.
goes a good thing.
I think that's it. Okay, well, everyone, if you're watching this as a recording and you had questions, obviously pop them in the comments.
Mm.
Don't forget to like and subscribe on Philip's channel, Irish Medieval History, and my channel, The Creative Contessa. And we hope to see you at our weekly live streams.
Happy days, which we'll be doing more of, hopefully.
Thanks,
Anyway, guys, thanks very much from my side. Once again, Rachel, thank you so much. It was Rachel, by the way, who set this all up with Ryan. So please thank Rachel and Ryan for all the work that they have been doing behind the scenes. I've been doing nothing. I've literally just been lying on the floor. So please do not thank me. Definitely pop over. If you're coming over from my channel, all you need to do is click on my channel, then go down to the very bottom, and you can see Creative Contessa's badge at the bottom of my channel. Click on that, and that's where Rachel just doesn't have live streams as well. She has loads of tutorials. If you're into living history in the 15th century clothing, definitely subscribe over to Rachel's channel. Anyway, regardless, thank you so much for Rachel for that. And by the way, guys, once again, thank you so much for all the positive feedback and
it's
all
been
the
great.
comments in there. To suddenly go from a lot of abuse at the very start to suddenly having our casuals build us up again, it means a lot to us. So thank you, guys.
It does.
And of course, see you guys. Bye.
Stay creative, guys. Until later.
Slán go bhfuil,